going on?
Wacky stuff is happening with my computer.
Wacky stuff.
So I'm gonna, Steve tried to tutor me on going to a different thing and that didn't work either.
So you tried the Ferguson guest and you weren't able to connect?
That, it went onto private automatically.
Type in Thomas 1801, capital T. Check.
Oh, look.
Check.
It's happening. I think it's happening.
Jenna,
Yep, I can hear you.
can you try to screen share, please?
Can I do screen share?
Yeah, just do a test. I just want to make sure you can share okay.
Is a little bit late.
Yeah, this is much further than my basement, so.
Exactly.
I gotta go.
And Dave, do we have everyone in the room that will be in the room for staff?
Everyone from staff, I don't know if Prasenjit is joining virtual or if he's joining in person. I didn't hear from him that he would be here, but maybe you did.
I did not hear.
Jenna, can you hear me?
So is that
Jenna.
something we should do as a matter of course if we're gonna,
Yeah?
you know, we
If I talk normally, so now I'm like right up against the microphone. You can hear this, I assume, right?
Another new thing.
Not well.
Man. All right, I'm gonna grab this mic. How about now? Is that better?
most of us.
Stalling.
A little bit.
Okay, I'm all squared away at this point.
Okay, thanks, Jenna.
Yep.
All right. Okay, good evening. I would like to call the regular meeting of the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors for Monday, July 19th, 2021 to order. First up, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh, I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And
Did you
if
hit
Dave-
your mic button? Yeah,
Thank
just
you, Dave.
keep that on.
Sure will.
All right.
Thank you. Did you want to offer us any kind of instructions for participating in this meeting today, Dave?
Indeed, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to lean into the microphone because it tends to come through a little better. I'll try not to have it like my NPR voice. Thank you all for joining. This is the July 19th regular meeting of the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors. This meeting's been advertised as both an in-person and hybrid, or virtual meeting rather, conducted using our Zoom platform. Staff's going to be monitoring both the Zoom room and facilitating here, so I appreciate your patience in advance as we kind of work through this new format here. Anybody present in the main building can engage at the appropriate times, as we used to do traditionally, by coming up to the podium and addressing the board. And please provide your name and municipality of residence prior to speaking. If you are in attendance at home, participating in the Zoom meeting, I just ask that you please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. But if you do want to participate or offer comment when acknowledged by the chair, you may unmute yourself and you should be able to come through loud and clear. The Zoom audio is tied directly into our main meeting room's PA system, so it should be pretty easy for all of us to hear and interact. In order to, please don't use the chat. to engage since the chat's not being monitored. In fact, there's no way for us to engage back with the chat. And then, as has typically been the practice, board members are asked to indicate their name when either motioning or seconding a motion so that we can get the proper record for the minutes. I see a quorum is here, so I don't have to worry about a roll call. I'll yield back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. First up on our agenda would be citizens' input for anything that is not on the agenda. Would anyone care to comment on anything not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the July 6th, 2021 Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors meeting.
This is Patty. I move that we approve the July 6, 2021 minutes of the Board of Supervisors meeting.
Rescinded.
Okay, we have 3 seconds. I'm assuming we're all in favor. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Dave, quick procedural question. I forgot to announce the executive session. Can I announce it now, or do I need to be right at the beginning of a meeting?
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, and do you have the date for me, or is that not?
Or, I don't know if you were able to receive that by email, Dave.
You have a PowerPoint?
I have a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, let me pull it up.
Well, you're fitting right in
Thank
because
you.
we've all had our share of technical issues this evening. So it's troubleshooting night here in Ferguson Township.
I didn't receive anything. Is it on the shared drive?
It is.
Is it under your folder?
It's a complicated step-by-step
I know,
process.
but I know how you think. I can find it.
It would be an admin community engagement under report in progress.
Okay.
It was a little bit of a large file, so it should be landing there.
Got it.
You got it?
Yes, but
Wow.
I do need to.
Very quick.
I'm gonna try to. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try to log. I'm gonna log into the Zoom, and you can get started. Oh, there's the
Okay.
email.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'll just do that. This will help.
Sounds good. All right, so a PowerPoint will be forthcoming as we work out our technical issues, and Centrise will just ease us into the presentation tonight.
Fantastic. So, as part of the presentation, I provided to you a map of Ferguson Township broken into the 3 wards because I really want to kind of highlight a little bit about the different communication channels that we use and acknowledging that our sub-demographic each respond a little differently according to the National Citizen Survey that was conducted in 2019. So the next slide that I am trying to position in such a way that you can view,
There we
the
go.
township manager has
Super quick. Thanks, Dave.
successfully, quickly got it up. Thank you, Dave. I wouldn't want you to miss out on
Great.
this beautiful GIS work done by our GIS
Great.
technician. Yeah, so as you can see, largely Ward 1 is represented on the township map, which is interesting, but also makes sense according to the survey results that were conducted in our National Citizen Survey in 2019. So if we move to the next slide, here it demonstrates the 7 different digital and non-digital publications that we use to distribute information. The percentage below, for example, number 1, the top item says township website. According to the National Citizen Survey, 55% of the residents that responded indicated that they rely on our township website for a major source of information on township information, events, etc. And so just kind of going down through the 7 provided here, annual print newsletters, the 2nd largest communication channel that is used for information by the township, which I thought at first was interesting myself because, of course, we're moving more in a digital age and things are more digitally received and shared. But when you think back to the map that I provided there at the beginning of the presentation, Ward 1 has a sub-demographic that largely represents our agricultural residents and community. And as we've been told, a lot of times folks are out on the farm and they're still doing what they do every day to conduct their business within the farm our agricultural community. And so relying on that that printed publication is very useful. So, when we talk here in communications, here at Ferguson Township, while we think about Ward 2 and Ward 3 that are more suburban, neighboring up against Borough of State College, digital publications make complete sense, as that's the kind of interaction, the communication channel that's used for interaction to engage and receive information. But there again, with Ferguson Township, we have the 3 wards uniquely positioned and all kind of having pockets of sub-demographics, and so we really try to make a point to leverage all of our communication channels, digital and non-digital, so we're effective at engaging as well as informing our residents. So I won't bother to go through all of them. I will kind of highlight number 7. We just launched our township LinkedIn account maybe a year and a half ago. So it was after we conducted the National Citizen Survey, so we don't really have any data that indicates how often or how major of a source, or not so much of a source, it is used. But it's really more for sharing information like job postings or different information about the organization as it relates to maybe more human resource. So if there are no questions on this slide, I'll just move into here. The next page here is what I like to call more of the regular, and last year when I presented as more of the regular ongoing community engagement and communication activities that we do. So, communications coordinator Nick Figaro, he is on a daily basis providing updates to our website and our social media, and that's an accumulation of sharing posts from our Council of Government agencies to ensure that folks are updated on different events that are happening, for example, at school library, to different activities or information that needs to be shared within our local setting here. So proclamations or resolutions, ordinances that are enacted, he's trying to get that information up and available for residents. Kind of going down through the list, some of which I'm sure you're not surprised. For example, Coffee and Conversation held just last week. We're trying to get information out there to raise awareness, to engage residents with hopefully increased participation. We do our monthly e-newsletter. We find that is, a really great way to get an abundance of information into or in front of those who relatively consider that to be a major source of information. So there, again, regular ongoing communication. I'll note there at the very bottom this year, through some more creative, innovative strategies, for example, the short videos. Dave Fabolka and Nick Figaro, Township Manager and Communications Coordinator, they did a little video and it was very well received, and we had the largest donations this year from the Tudic Trust Center Gifts campaign, so $3,060 to be exact. Moving into the next slide, this is what I kind of refer to more as we're responsive to different things that are going on within the township, trying to engage our residents or increase awareness on different topics that are going on. So as presented last year, we did a lot of information to try and engage the community on the stormwater fee, talking about the phases, the studies that were completed. And this year, Nick and I find ourselves engaged in a stormwater implementation committee and trying to figure out some creative strategic approach to getting information out in front of our residents so they have a better understanding of what will be their stormwater fee assessment for 2022. Also, we actually just wrapped up, I think, our last COVID-19 bi-weekly communications that we were sending through Constant Contact. We did stop sending those to residents in the business community, but we were sending them out every 2 weeks to provide increased information so residents in the business community had what they needed to make informed decisions based on what was happening at a local, regional, and state level. The internship program, so I have listed all the different activities that required some assistance or some action on our end to increase engagement and communication. I think one most notable thing I'll share with all of you is that we've had an increased number of requests to provide support and assistance to authorities, boards, commission, and committees. So for example, we're happy to provide some assistance with the Pine Grove Mills Small Area Plan with the launch of the new Facebook page. We're also happy to provide some more assistance to engage the community on parks and recreation. One of our most, I think, commented on recently is the short video to raise awareness about things like EMS Week and Public Works Week. All of which is creative and trying to find ways to get people more aware. Quick, short little videos seem to be very, very appropriate for that. So moving into the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more of the strategic plan that was adopted or approved by the Board of Supervisors in 2017. The main focal areas that were kind of categorized as goals according to the strategic plan are here listed. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to highlight some of the major accomplishments. I'm not going in detail in this presentation for all of the items that we've done. We've been pretty busy here. The staff has accomplished quite a bit, but I'm just presenting this evening on some high-level initiatives that have been accomplished, but I'm happy to provide details if the board is interested in that. Moving to the next slide, just highlighting a few of the financial stability. So of course we prepare the annual comprehensive budget and the capital improvement plan each year, and we've also been awarded the CAFR award. We also deployed and we now are using scenario software for financial modeling, which positions us to make informed decisions based on a forecast model with alternatives and assumptions, so we can consider different scenarios before presenting a recommendation to the board or consideration for staff discussion. Facilitate and implement a stormwater management utility fee study. No need to go into detail there. I'm just going to kind of, again, highlight the main items. So economic development, in terms of the specific goals that were listed in the strategic plan were the creation of an advisory committee and the hiring of a director for an economic development position, all of which is still being discussed in maybe the CIP, for example, but it seems to be evolving as the board continues conversation. But some items that have been accomplished, for example, are, again, the communications from the COVID-19 business relief information to the business community, as well as the economic development partnership that advances our regional economic development initiatives. For example, we've participated with the support to KFC and other initiatives such as that. So moving into the next slide, environmental stewardship. I feel like we've done, across all departments, we've all kind of had our part here. So ranging from applying for grants and purchasing a hybrid vehicle and an electric station to bringing to the board a recommendation for the approval of green infrastructure policy to green cleaning policy, the construction of the LED public works building, tree preservation and protection ordinance, the list goes on and on. Again, these are just a few of the accomplishments and achievements. Best management practices for operations. Administration led by Township Manager Dave Pavolka facilitated the salary study. Him and Angela Kalki, our human resource administrator, worked closely to have that study conducted to review the job descriptions and plan for future growth, so we can continue to attract top quality candidates. Moving to the next slide. Best management practices, my apologies, there's a duplication there. Increased participatory government, just to highlight a few, we continue to engage residents for feedback on all items ranging from park playground equipment to engaging folks so there are no surprises on the stormwater fee assessment, to continued support for Pine Grove Mills Farmers Market and the launch of the inaugural Route 45 getaways. We continue to provide support. And so we have this participatory government that also being positioned and participating in COG, Council of Governments, we attend, staff continues to attend many committees to come back and have that regional cooperation, which kind of rolls in nicely and smoothly with partnerships and regional thinking. So we continue to do our best to partner with our neighboring municipalities and COG agencies. We also, as you are aware, are taking on the evaluation of our participation with the Center Region Parks and Recreation. So with that quick overview, that concludes the presentation on community engagement and the strategic plan progress report. Any questions?
Any questions for Centrise? Looks like there's no questions. It was a well-done presentation and a great overview to initiate our participation in the strategic planning process that's upcoming. So really appreciate that. It's a nice little refresher course of our conversations in the past. Okay, let's then move on to unfinished business. First item on the agenda is a public hearing for, a public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, authorizing the chair and secretary to execute an extension of time letter for the Automated Red Light Enforcement Program project funding agreement between the Township of Ferguson and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and this will be introduced by Township Manager Dave Probalka.
Thank you very much. So provided with your agenda is a copy of the resolution that's been advertised for public hearing. As the chair just described, it authorizes the township manager and chair to execute an extension of time letter for our ARLI grant, Automated Red Light Enforcement. You may recall, because we've been talking about this for a number of years now, this grant project is to install traffic signal optimization software that will help us better coordinate the timing of our traffic signals, approximately 22 traffic signals in the township, to help them to respond more quickly to real-time conditions. So the project will involve the installation of some conduit and fiber, as well as some wireless arrays that will integrate our traffic signal network, provide real-time data to the township engineer's office, and from there, the engineer can make modifications and adjustments to signal timing based on the conditions that are being observed, and it'll also help us to inform our decisions in the future with respect to construction of new signals or other traffic enhancements and improvements. As I said, this has been a number of years coming. We're confident that we're going to be able to meet our current grant deadline of January 9, 2022, but just to be safe, we asked and received approval from PennDOT District 2 to extend that grant period of performance through the new deadline of January 9, 2023. We're absolutely confident that we can meet that deadline, but we hope to be done significantly earlier than that. In order for us to capitalize on that authorized extension, though, there has to be this extension of time letter, which is done by resolution. That brings us to where we are this evening.
Thank you very much, Dave. This is a public hearing, so I will open the floor to the citizens who might like to comment on this. Okay, I'm seeing none. Dave? Okay. So I will close the public hearing and ask for a motion from the board.
This is Lisa. I'll move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution authorizing the chair and secretary to execute an extension of time letter for the Automated Red Light Enforcement Program project funding agreement between the Township of Ferguson and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
This is Patty, I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Dave?
This is presented as Resolution 2021-27. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Mitra?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
Ms. Denini?
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next up is a review of the draft turf, grass, weeds, and other vegetation ordinance amendment, also introduced by Dave Probalka.
Thank you. So at the second meeting in May, the board considered a request from Supervisor Mitra to amend the turf, grass, weeds, and other vegetation ordinance by either relaxing or repealing entirely the restriction on lawnscapes and turf grass that they be maintained to a maximum height of 6 inches. The discussion that evening yielded the board directing staff to prepare an amendment for review that incorporated provisions of the township's green infrastructure policy, which was enacted by resolution earlier this year, into the turf, grass, weeds, and other vegetation ordinance that would help expand on the current provisions that permit a managed natural landscape to include other elements like meadowed areas, low, no-mow areas, pollinators, etc. So Provided with your agenda this evening is a copy of the resolution, the green infrastructure policy resolution, as well as a red line drafted ordinance that kind of aims to achieve those goals. What we're looking for tonight is any comments, feedback you might have. We can work those into the draft and present it back, or if you're comfortable moving forward, you can always authorize it for a public hearing. But we're not suggesting, staff isn't suggesting we are at that stage just yet. We might want to take a look at the ordinance and work in some amendments and then talk about a strategy forward from there. We're available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Dave. All right, recommendation is to discuss, review, and comment on the draft ordinance. So I'll open it up for discussion. Anybody want to take the lead?
So I'll ask a question. Since I asked for this, I mean, I think I understand the intent, and I think I like the fact that we are trying to grow towards green infrastructure and allow essentially people to be more environmentally friendly and less destructive. But my reading of the changes, basically, what I get from it is that there is more bureaucracy being thrown on the and a burden being thrown on the shoulders of people who want to be environmentally friendly, because now we are asking them to get a permit, they will be audited, this and that, whereas people who are, destroying the environment don't have to do any of that. So I hope that my reading is wrong, and I'm hoping that maybe Dave or whoever can tell us what really is the objective, because all I see here is that we are putting more burden on people who want to be environmentally friendly.
And I would just ask then, Prasenjit, you mean specifically a permit requirement is the burden? Would that be the particular burden? My read of it is it did integrate the green infrastructure in parks language into this ordinance very well, and it expanded conceptually how we want to think about private land management in the township. So would you be specifically talking about the requirement of getting the permit?
Yeah, so I'm specifically talking about all the extra work that someone has to do now, which means it says they have to register the property to the township. So in essence, somebody who is doing the right thing has to come to the township and register the property. Somebody who is destroying the environment does that without that requirement. So there is a sort of dual treatment of citizens, and this is just upside down in the sense that we are requiring all this paperwork from people who are just trying to do the right thing environmentally. So now they have to say the names and addresses and phone numbers of the landlord and landscape designer, which means that if you want to have a natural area, now you need a landscape designer. People who are, who want to mow for pesticides that destroy our environment don't have to do any of these. They have to give the parcel number and the address of the proposed property. A brief description of a maintenance plan, not required if you want to pollute the environment, required if you want to do the right thing. A permit is required and then an audit. This is just exhaustive bureaucracy, and I do not think that people who want to do the right thing, who want to do what is good for our environment, will go through all of these. So I think even if the intent is right, I don't think that this really helps the purpose, which is to have, less environmental destruction. This is my opinion. Now
Thanks.
I'm happy to hear counter arguments to that.
Thanks, Prasenjit. Did anybody else want to offer any?
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So could you just describe how this changes what had been the grass and turf ordinance and the managed natural landscape? Was that the name of the?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you. Just how, I guess that specific part, the managed natural landscape, what is different about that portion of it, which is now called the green infrastructure portion? What specifically has changed there?
Yeah, so specifically, what I intended to do with the draft was to not to relieve the permit requirement, which was pretty clear from the board's last discussion, that there wasn't, at least there wasn't an interest by consensus in just removing the maximum restriction on what turf grass would be allowed to grow and taking all the permit requirements away. So you'd still have the registration process, but part of the modification in the draft is to relieve a little bit what the requirement would be for the maintenance plan. So really, what will come of this, if it's adopted the way it's presented, would be a short application where you would have to put some of that information that Mr. Mitra just reviewed. Now, the landscape firm wouldn't be required unless you hired somebody. If it was just the landowner, they don't need to hire a landscape firm just to meet the requirements of the ordinance. But if you did have somebody so that they could be contacted if there's any complaints or questions that we would ask that you list that as well. It also adds in more designation or more allowances for the types of infrastructure that you could install. So part of the managed natural landscape ordinance that exists right now is not to just let grass just grow. That wouldn't be congruent with what the intent is of the ordinance. But by introducing these different designations, like the grow zone or the meadowed area, you'll have a little bit more flexibility to just let your lawn grow, as long as it's done with some intentionality, as long as there's some maintenance plan that's ascribed to it. And then it also introduces the pollinator garden and pollinator plot. So what's changed about it is perhaps it made some clarification on what types of green infrastructure would be permitted to be installed, because by referencing what we have in our green infrastructure policy, it's something that we've already looked at through the lens of some of these other concerns that we've heard from perhaps some of the other residents about some of the nuisances that might be introduced by lawnscapes that just aren't maintained. But it also, the intent is to relax some of the registration requirements so that, yes, we expect you to tell us what you're going to do to maintain it, but that might just be, oh, I'm going to mow it twice a year if it's grass, or something, very simple. It doesn't have to be this thorough, complex, very detailed maintenance plan that, is subject to review and approval by township staff. It also clarifies some of the definitions, as we talked about, takes the intent from the green infrastructure policy and injects it into the township's this ordinance. And those are probably the main themes. Oh, and then some of it is just kind of housekeeping. For example, in the current ordinance under 105, landowner rights and responsibilities, there's a provision that notes that it doesn't apply to rural agricultural, rural residential, or ag research zoning districts. But there's also another section that says provisions inapplicable to certain land. I just moved it over to that because it makes more sense to be in that provision. So, some of it is housekeeping, cleanup, and the rest is the substance that I just reviewed.
Good question. Thank you, and great answer. Steve?
Well, I'll comment. I think that this is an improvement on the ordinance that we have at hand. However, I think for Sanjit's initial question and mine, which I raised a number of years ago, really didn't apply completely, or isn't addressed completely, which is, this is for managed landscape with native plants and carefully selected plantings. I think that a regular turf lawn with the grass mix from wherever is healthier and more eco-friendly if it's allowed to grow taller than if it's mowed frequently. And I think that's where percentage was coming from. So I I think that this is an improvement on what we have. I think it does make it easier for people wanting to do this type of thing. My focus was more on the 6-inch height limit on a regular grass lawn. That being said, I got the feeling at their last meeting that we're now at about a 2 to 3 instead of 1 to 4 position on that one. So.
Or 3 to 2, we're not sure, we're not
And
sure.
that's a good point, and if I may, I should have noted that I left that intact, but with the understanding that there wasn't really a clear direction that came from the last board discussion on that. So I just left it at 6 inches, but a change to 8 or 10 or whatever you think is appropriate can be easily worked in.
Yeah, but I'm referring to that though, with any grass, not just native grasses.
So could I
Right.
actually, though, point out a detail that I'm seeing in this and the implementation? So grow zone is listed in here, and we have a grow zone in Fairbrook Park. We have two kinds, actually. One will be intentionally planted with pollinator plants, but others are forever meant to just be low/no mow, and that is just regular old run-of-the-mill grass there. So if I were wanting to, if I didn't live in RR and I lived in R1 and I wanted to flex this, and what I really wanted was to mow much less frequently, I would call it a grow zone. And not, or a meadow, correct. But meadow, yeah. Grow zone, I think, is the lowest on the rings of,
Prescribed plants.
yeah. And then maybe meadow, I don't know. When I think of meadow, I think of actually certain kinds of grassland plants composing it, but that also might be more strict than our ordinance actually is in the green infrastructure policy.
Right.
But grow zone is definitely just grass, like,
Yeah, a grow zone compared to a meadow, and I know to some degree it's splitting hairs, but in the definition, you note that the meadowed area talks about a plan to maintain, remove invasives, prevent the spread of them, et cetera, et cetera. But the grow zone would just, would be more akin to what you see in Fairbrook Park and much of the area that just, kind of is allowed to propagate and grow. So if the board were to say that that 6-inch restriction ought to be amended to be 8 inches or 10 inches, that would be the maximum permitted height for turf grass without going through this registration process. If you did just elect to register your lawn, and then it could grow until it didn't
Stop
grow
growing.
anymore, until it stopped growing. But the assurance that it gives the township, 2 parts really. Number one, it gives us some idea where these are, so that if we get a complaint or if we hear from an adjacent property owner who's concerned about it, we can reference and enforce.
Yeah.
Secondarily, it also tells us that there's some plan to not, to maybe mow once or twice. And that may be all that maintenance plan is, that I'm gonna mow it at the beginning of the growing season and at the end of the growing season, which is all the maintenance plan that we have for Fairbrook and parts of Cecil Urban and Tudeck as well. So it doesn't have to be complex, and it's just a matter of having that registration process, again, so that we know, we're informed, and also that it kind of relaxes that requirement to keep it at whatever height the board decides to set.
thanks, Steve. Steve.
But the one difference between what I'm talking about and this is the grow zone specifically says native seed plantings.
Or natural
or natural
vegetation. I did not read that as
Yeah.
native natural vegetation. I read that as 2 separate things, and I believe that's what Dave Modricker was confirming when we did talk about that. But that is a nuance, and that is a place where you could interpret either way, and we know that that can be problematic. So
Yeah, but if it's Kentucky bluegrass, is that natural vegetation?
that is how it was interpreted when
Okay.
we discussed
In
the
that
green
case, yeah,
infrastructure
that'd be
policy. But you're right, that when you read it that way, it can mean that, and that might be something that we wanna address. Lisa?
So I guess my question is similar, because I think I read meadow differently, because I was interpreting meadow with a designated area where the existing site vegetation can continue to grow, you're just taking out invasives. So I was reading that as the grass that can just grow, and you don't have to be planting a native seed mix in there. So
I think we have probably some language, I think we talked about this in the green infrastructure policy, about it being possibly more resembling each other than we wanted to, but we decided to go with it, and I think that if we want to change it, we could, but again, we'd want to align both policies if we decide this is the direction to go in this policy.
Well, I think there's the planted meadow and then the meadow, and
Right.
then it seems like grow zone
Is
just
just a me-
applies to those two things, or the pollinator. But that's just how I read it. I
Yes.
understand where we're trying to go with it, but I think there are just some suggestions for how we might want to maybe organize that, if that's the intention of what grow zone.
Like, grow zone is the overarching thing,
That's
and then
how I-
each, yes.
Yeah, so that
Yes.
was my question, and just how to interpret that, because I felt like when I saw meadow there, oh, that's where somebody can just let their lawn
Yes.
grow with a permit and, you know, taking on invasives, so.
And you're right, they do look identical in the way we've defined them. Also, I would say in the overall ordinance, it for the yard, probably for both, it requires invasive species removal. So that even further makes the grow zone and the meadow, the one type of meadow, even like indistinguishable.
Mm.
Because overall, you have to remove invasives.
So take grow zone and then the meadows are kind of subheadings in the definition below grow zone, or take grow zone out entirely?
No.
Frankly, I took the green infrastructure definitions and I just
Yeah,
dropped them right in there.
yeah.
So.
And that's good, that's what we
it
asked
doesn't
for.
Yeah, right, no,
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm just saying, if you wanna either kinda have grow zone as the definition, and then below that, we could put in planted meadow and
That's-
meadow.
Yes. There's
With expansions
subcategories.
on that, so that they would all
Yes.
fall under grow zone, they would still be distinct from, pollinator. So the
Yes.
pollinator would be something that's a little more.
Very intentional, yeah.
Maintained,
Yeah.
right.
I guess, for me, if that's the interpretation, and I think we need to make it clear if that is the case, I'm fine with these changes, because I think that I have no problem with essentially notifying township and thereby your neighbors that this is an intentional thing. I
No,
have a
no
reason
cost
for
permit,
this.
right? No
Yeah.
cost permit.
Right.
Yeah,
So in terms of burden, it's really more the percent it was speaking of. As we're working out these details, it's no cost, we're working out the allowance for that ability. And I understand the idea that the paradigm is that regularly mowed turf grass is what we all should be doing. I understand that is the paradigm, the dominant paradigm we're functioning in, and so we don't make people that want to mow get permits. But given that we're functioning in that paradigm and trying to maintain harmony, I think trying to, without much burden, allow that seems like a good direction to go. I want to also, though, emphasize at this point, talking about harmony, I'm not sure if it's actually found its way into the green infrastructure policy, but we just amended the grow zone map at Fairbrook, and that would be, it's in pursuit of maintaining harmony. I'm not going to say that the mowing people should grow their grass closer to their adjacent property. Because that would be not within the dominant paradigm. But I am gonna say that we should probably ask for some perimeters to be maintained in this. So you're dealing with that fence line. I don't know that it has to be as large as I would intend for Fairbrook, which is more about the swath of a mixed-use path, but like a homeowner mower path, I think would be sufficient to maintain that.
It's about 3 feet, a deck on a residential lawn.
I don't know, so. I'm like, that seems
2 to
big
3
though. But yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
23 inches, so 2 feet, all right.
2 feet, there
2
you go.
feet, so 2 feet
sounds
perimeter.
good, yeah, so, and that's just done, that can be something that staff, helps educate if there is any kind of complaint, why this is a beneficial policy and that we're, making this adaptation to ease their worries about any kind of nuisance possibilities. But, Patty, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
general, you were talking about the 6 inches. When I talked to people in my neighborhood about this, everybody was actually rather upset that there might be a change. And I think largely it has to do with maybe having a lot of rentals in the area and maybe it being an excuse to just not have to mow. It's, being put on the tenants. And so anyway, so there's some concern about that. And then also that if in fact the length increases, then people are going to dump even more chemicals on their yard because look at what I've got next door, so I'm going to dump even more chemicals. So it becomes this catch-22. Overall, I would say that Overlook Heights is not jazzed about the idea of increasing the grass length at all. There was just one point in here too, I can't even find it now that I'm trying to look for it, but I just want to be sure that when we're talking about the property owners rather than his and hers, that we become more gender neutral in our terms. And I just saw it one place, I don't even remember, I can't even find it now, but that was it. And
So we're moving to a they, there, kind of a supplantation of, I'm making up all kinds of words here tonight, so supplanting that with, using that to supplant he and her. Thank you, Patty. Just going back to your first point about the property owner versus rental, that kind of thing. So Dave, my understanding of how this would be implemented is that somebody who's renting would need property owner permission to implement this. And I know Patty's talking about the grass height, and I'll get to that next, but if they wanted to get a permit, it would have to be through the permission of the property owner would have to be required for that. Okay.
That's correct.
If we change the maximum height, can the landlord overrule that in their lease? So if we said we're gonna make it 8 inches, which is only 2 inches different, if we're gonna make it 8 inches, could the landlord require shorter?
Yeah, I think so, and perhaps a more likely consideration is the homeowners associations that operate in the township. Typically, and this isn't always true, but oftentimes, the declarations of covenants that apply to HOAs are congruent with our restriction of 6 inches, which from their perspective gives them an enforcement vehicle that they otherwise wouldn't have. So hypothetically, if the board raised that limit to 8 inches or 10 inches, and we got calls from HOAs that their residents were letting their lawns grow more than 6 inches and asking us to do something, but we would not be able to act, and that may be fine, I'm not making it as a qualitative statement, I'm just saying that's something that they would then be responsible for enforcing through the other mechanisms that are in their covenants. Same would be true for a landlord-tenant kind of relationship. They may be able to require that lawnscape be maintained more rigidly than our ordinance, but we wouldn't participate in the enforcement of that.
Gotcha. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Patty. So I'm sort of split on this. So I very much support the integration of the green infrastructure language into this because I think it helps in education. It helps everybody say the same words to mean green infrastructure, and I think that's important, and it's educational, and it moves us in the right direction. I also think that 6 inches is a little on the short side, and I really sympathize with fighting against the dominant paradigm that is very, very lawn-oriented. And I think I threw this out there before, but that we in the United States use more fertilizer and chemicals on our lawns than in agriculture. And I think that's kind of awful. We should probably be reserving those important resources for our food crops. But I'm also sensitive to people's concerns. So while I wouldn't go as far as to say, let's remove the ordinance altogether, or, let's get to 12 inches, I would absolutely entertain 8 or 10 inches. So that's how I feel about the language in this ordinance and the direction we're taking.
yeah, I think I still support the lower 6 inches and only what I see in Overlook Heights too, it also, quite honestly, when people mow their lawns, even at 6 inches and, they do their pass or whatever, it always ends up in the street, and then that then also ends up in the storm drains, and, and if you make it longer, it just becomes even more of a thing. So even more maintenance for all of that. Again,
Yeah.
obviously it's a board decision
Yeah.
and a majority, but I wish we had more citizen input.
We will, probably. So do we want to, since there kind of seem to be two main topics that we're talking about here, one, the changes of adding in the green infrastructure language, and two, the kind of height requirement on the
Yeah.
turf, why don't we pull those apart into two separate things and first talk about just the green infrastructure portion of adding that into this ordinance? Are we all in agreement that that language should be added in the manner that Lisa indicated, with the grow zone being the main category and each subcategory? We could probably also remove that invasive species removal in the meadow and do it as an overall thing, because that also goes to concerns about nuisance, and would help everyone get along.
Yes.
So what do we think about that, the green infrastructure part? Lisa, you had a...
Yeah, I'm supportive of incorporating this and the
Okay.
changes. Following our last meeting, I was trying to think of what issues would come up, either with the height, changing the height restriction, or of allowing meadows and things in multifamily areas, or even R2 with shared yards and things like that. So I was trying to think of what different issues might come up there. So I don't know if we, if
I
anyone has some
think
thoughts
two,
on that.
immediately I'm thinking two that would be, it has to be the owner. So in the multifamily, it can't just be one apartment, it's gotta be the owner of that
Mhm.
property. So that, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing in that paradigm.
Yeah, I don't know, I was.
The tenant can't get permission without,
Sure,
the
it'd be the
owner,
property
and then the
owner.
owner has to care about the other tenants, and so there has to be some communication. That would be one thing I could think of. And then keeping the perimeter and the invasive species out,
Right,
the duplex situation, I don't know if there's,
yeah, that perimeter might have solved a lot of the
It's like a setback.
potential problems there.
Can I just remind just everybody to do whatever you can to kind of speak into the.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
That's all
I
right.
kept trying to get away from mine.
My teacher voice again. Did you want to elaborate on that at all, Lisa?
So I was wondering what consequences, there may be in multifamily properties, or even R2 with shared or adjacent lawns. But I think your suggestion of the perimeter or the border around the lawn having to be maintained at the whatever inches we set, I think might solve potential conflicts there. Yeah, if for a multifamily, it would be the property owner, so they would have to comply with, whatever rules there were for maintaining their meadow
Yeah.
or whatever, so.
So in talking about the perimeter that you're talking about, and that's to serve as a visual cue, right? And I just worry, like, do dogs obey, like, the visual cues, that sort of thing?
Well, the perimeter, I think, more is like, also similar to why typically in municipalities, not here though, I've learned that they have like a little bit of a fence setback, like a 1 foot fence setback. It's sort of just to make sure that that particular activity isn't happening on your neighbor's property. And in the case of the high grass, it also provides a break where invasive species are less to kind of bridge that gap, so it helps for maintenance. So I think maybe a little bit less about a visual break per se, but it does tell you like this is where that ends. Also, I wanted to clarify on that. So, frequently property owners, and of course we get into the dominant paradigm discussion here, will put their flower beds right up to the adjacent property, right? They'll put a nicely landscaped rock garden with lavender and peonies and whatever in there, right up against their neighbor's property. And that's fine. We don't have any rules against it. I wouldn't want this ordinance to be interpreted that if that same landowner wanted to do a portion of that property as meadow, that they'd have to then have those flower beds comply with the setback or the perimeter mode. It's only when it's one of these features that's going to be abutting an adjacent landowner. Would that be the proper interpretation of how that would be interpreted?
Yeah, that's right. We, you know, and that would probably be fleshed out in that application or so,
Yeah.
just to, you know, if there was a garden, vegetable garden, flower bed, whatever, that was in that, you know, closer to the property line, then this ordinance would allow, we
Okay.
wouldn't regulate in that
Okay.
area.
Just checking. Okay, and Presenjit, if we're kind of taking this as two pieces, one, do we want to integrate these green infrastructure components, topical components, into this? We used to call it weed and grass ordinance. It'd be nice to call it like green yard landscaping ordinance, but maybe that's a bridge too far. What do you think of integrating the green infrastructure components into the ordinance?
Yeah, I'm in support of that because, like I think Steve mentioned earlier, it improves upon what we have now. And so, yeah, I would be in support of that. Except my concern is with 103.4, the audit part. So at some point, whenever it's appropriate to do, we'll see if that can, you know, propose an amendment to strike that, in the sense that if we have the whole ordinance will be subject to will be the sort of law of the land that will be subject to enforcement by the township as and when needed. My preference would be like we do with a bunch of other things in response to a complaint, as opposed to doing it proactively as it says here, just to, you know, let people who are doing reasonable things to have less to worry about. But again, that can be an amendment that we can see where we stand on. But otherwise, I think, irrespective of other things, this absolutely is better than what it was before, and so I'm in support of it.
Thank you very much, Presenjit, and that's a good point. So I'm going to just say that I believe that all of the board is supportive of integrating the green infrastructure components into the ordinance in the manner Lisa described, with the tiers, the grow zone and the categories underneath.
Those tiers.
Let's then jump to what Presenjit's brought to the table, the process, and basically that would be the no-cost permit, the audit process, and the maintenance plan, I think would be the three requirements here. I would like the permit, even though I think it's gonna be similar to the chicken permit, and I will mention that sometime later in our meeting, about that, you know, it is true that sometimes folks don't get permits. So I'll just say, since I brought it up, you know, there's been incidents of many chickens in people's yards. And I know there's like not that many chicken ordinances in Ferguson Township. And it would be helpful if people would apply, because then we could get the chickens back to their rightful owner. But that's another story. So I would be supportive of the permit. I am supportive of a very basic maintenance plan, so we understand it's a communication tool. I am also, along with Presenjit, not supportive of the audit. I think it takes staff time that's unnecessary. If there's not a problem, we don't need to make a problem, and it can be complaint-driven in that manner. Those are my thoughts on those 3 points.
I agree.
Great.
Okay, we have all agreement here. If you didn't hear that, Presenjit, what do you think about those points?
No, I'm in agreement with that. As there is my sort of deeply held moral view and there is my pragmatic view. So my pragmatic view self is in agreement with this, and this is a question, not a rhetoric question or leading question. I got all of that discussion except the part about the invasive species and something related to, I think, B and D, the meadow and the grow zone. In general, I am, I think we should be vigilant about invasive species and require people to keep an eye and remove it to the extent possible. So that's sort of a general philosophy. I didn't get the details of what was discussed, if anything. So I just wanted
Sure. Thank you. I can, I think, recap that. So first, in the language of the ordinance, Lisa suggested, and we kind of deliberated and thought that grow zone is kind of a meta descriptor of any of the categories: meadow, pollinator area, and the other kind of meadow. So Lisa suggested changing the language just a little bit to be more of like outline form, where grow zone is an overarching definition, and then the subcategories of that are the three other items in here. Yeah, okay.
that sounds great. Yeah.
And then I suggested we also could remove from that, I think it's only in the meadows, one kind of meadow definition, the requirement of removing invasive species, because it's elsewhere in the ordinance saying that you have to do that always, no matter what you've got.
Yeah.
And then
That's
I
great.
wanted also to add to this conversation, it's going to add some complexity that I don't necessarily want to deal with right now, but we talked about it the last time we did this ordinance, which is the difference between a noxious weed and an invasive species. So to be actually a noxious weed, you have to be listed on a state list of things, of noxious weeds. And right now, Pennsylvania, surprise, is very behind the ball in listing noxious weeds on the noxious weed list. So I believe that even something like calorie pear is still not listed on the list of noxious weeds, and we would definitely not want to be inviting invasive calorie pear, and we would want people to be removing it. So I believe in these ordinances right now, we're kind of using them interchangeably, but it might be something that we want to read it for and think about whether it's in this particular iteration of the ordinance or in the future.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could, instead of relying on a Pennsylvania listing, I don't know if we want to, if there is a US-based listing, or maybe we can make the language slightly different by saying invasive species, that is any species that is non-native and can harm the local ecosystem. Something like that, which would give us, and then it would be up to the arborist to sort of, and then the township manager as written, to decide whether this is invasive or not, and whether it needs to be taken out or not. And we'll just go with that. That's one thinking, but yeah, I'm willing to hear others.
And now I'm realizing exactly why we were probably referring the draft to the tree commission. I remember they had extensive conversations about this, and maybe we want to refer it to them with that question in mind of, tell us where to put the word invasive species versus noxious weed. Because I know they also, I agree with you, and I think the tree commission probably also does, is they wish more was listed on that noxious list. So we could probably rely on them to give us some direction on that very specific question. You guys think?
That makes sense.
Okay. Okay, I think we've got, including the green infrastructure, asking the question to the planning commission, the change to the process that does not involve the audit.
Right, I think Mr. Mitra is correct. There's a number of things that we enforce predominantly through complaint-driven requests. Those items also are allowed to be enforced through routine patrol. So I'd be reluctant to recommend that you remove it. If you do, we'll get by, it's fine. But I like having some language in any ordinance that allows staff to pursue enforcement and doesn't solely, restrict us to enforcement through, the initiative of a complaint.
I think, so I would add this refinement, so I respect what you're saying. I was not thinking what we were saying is to replace the language to say by complaint only, but just to remove the audit. So, I mean, if, I could imagine if the ordinance enforcement officer were out and saw a problematic lawn area, it wouldn't be like, oh, he can't enforce that. It would just be, I'm sorry, I've lost track of my place completely, but isn't there a mandatory audit every X time, period of time? I think that's what percentage is saying remove. If not, maybe we should have an amendment to,
It says periodically.
Yeah, I left the
Oh.
language pretty open-ended, so, it was really
what
to,
page is that on?
2 of 5.
And
If
Dave,
you're looking at-
speaking of, I see there's definition noxious weed. Is there definition for invasive species? Yes, there is.
Yes.
Okay. So maybe they are intended to be used exactly as they are. Okay, I'm sorry, what page was that again?
Page 2 of 5, it's, the heading is, number 4 under.
I see.
Letter C.
So, yeah, Dave, I understand what you're saying, but there is already in the existing ordinance language related to that, and in some sense that is being sort of replicated or being superseded by 103.4. So I'm talking about, if you look at 109, it talks a whole lot about, it doesn't say how that discovery is going to happen, but it says upon discovery, this notice shall be given, this is what needs to happen,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. There is a penalty for violation, and that applies sort of to the whole ordinance. I personally think that would be enough to enforce things in 103, whatever we are doing in 103 and so on.
Yeah, so the penalty, right, the penalty allowance for both are the same. The difference is the amount of time that a property owner would have to correct any observed violations. So I think what's written in the draft is 30 days for the managed
Yes.
landscape areas, it's 5 days. The period for, the penalty period for just the turf grass is much shorter than that. So typically what we do when we observe a violation of this ordinance, we provide a warning. The property owner gets 1 warning per growing season, and after that they begin actually we do door hangers even before we do the warning. So really you get 2 warnings at no penalty, and then after that you proceed through the violations. First violation, second notice, third notice. At that point, we go in and maintain it ourselves and assess the cost to the property owner. So, I tried to distinguish the 2 enforcement mechanisms a little bit, because when you're dealing with just a lawnscape or turf grass, at least the way we have it written now, it's a shorter, it's less of an allowance for, deviation from there.
So Dave, thanks for pointing that out. It's very helpful talking about this because I'm noticing that actually my suggestion would be similar to in Lisa's reorganization of that one section, that we really should have all of the enforcement under enforcement, including enforcement of the green infrastructure permit. So my suggestion would be whether or not we decide to remove this audit, there still would be enforcement of that permit, and that information should be moved down to enforcement and just delineated of 2 different, whether it's turf or green infrastructure permit. And so what that would mean is in this 4 bullet that percentage is referring to, from the point of any observed violations on would go under enforcement. And that is gonna stay unless we wanted to make a change with that, regardless of whether we have this audit bullet. And then speaking to the audit bullet, I'm still with Presenjit in removing the shall be periodically visually inspected by the township. I think that anybody who's receiving a permit and they're receiving the enforcement information, they're going to understand that this can be enforced. And I don't think it's necessary to have a shall be periodically visually inspected to verify the staff's ability to enforce this.
Yeah, and just to add, I think if you note the original ordinance, it does not say anything about the turf grass, that there would be periodic, and it uses language such as upon the discovery of the initial violation on a premises during a growing season. And something like that would be fine. The discovery could happen by the township. It would, if the township arborist or somebody driving around sees that and discovers that, they decide to do that, that's fine. And if someone complains, that's also fine. But just like the previous ordinance, I would keep it more open-ended, like upon discovery, this is what we shall do, which will allow us to do things as we have been doing, rather than push for a required a visual inspection periodically.
I just wanted to ask staff too, my recollection of the chicken ordinance, again, hearkening to the chicken ordinance, I think it's because it's got potential for nuisance, but my recollection is that we had possibly an initial inspection, but I can't remember for sure about that, but definitely no subsequent after inspection. So I believe it was like possibly an inspection, but maybe not with the original issuance of the permit. And then there was never like, and then you're gonna go back every year and make sure there's not too much poop in that coop. We didn't like have staff directly follow up with that. And I would think there would certainly be more like need to follow up with a residential chicken coop than a less mowed area. But that's just my recollection. Is that correct? Or just?
Probably.
Okay.
We really don't have
Switching
many
hats.
chicken permits issued.
But if we did, we wouldn't be going and checking up on them afterward, I believe is how, the ordinance is not written in that manner. And I don't know, I wouldn't think we'd need to be more strict on this. What is the rest of the board think about? I'm a big fan of consistency where possible. I think it helps people understand stuff. Yeah.
I agree. And so I think if we removed the term audit, I'm trying to go back up here and
Oh,
see.
yeah.
And that just said each property registered in accordance with the section may be periodically visually inspected, then that leaves that
Yeah.
door open.
Or you can put that in the enforcement section with the rest of the enforcement.
Yep,
Well, I'm
that
trying
would
to-
be good.
So I'm trying to work that out. So the enforcement section, so are you referring to?
Oh, notice of
Let's
an
see.
ordinance violations payment.
Right, okay. So then there, like Dave said, you have the 5 days to correct the violation.
Well, I think that needs to be, I think that was a point we were teasing out here, is that needs to be identified as turf without the green.
Yes, so, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
if we
can
can
add
just-
some language to that for you to look at.
Right, I'm thinking if, if the green infrastructure is just separated a bit more from the turf, just.
Yeah, I think that section,
Yeah.
Dave will have to kind of figure out what the best approach is, but basically underneath notice of ordinance violation, because this is an ordinance of kind of two sorts of landscape, traditional turf and green infrastructure, under that notice of ordinance violation, they have to handle that. However, they see, and the one is gonna have the 5 days, the other will have the
Yep.
30,
Yeah.
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 Okay, so I think we have all come to consensus on that. Do we, Dave, need an amendment because an amendment proposal because this is, oh, and I didn't even ask for a motion, we don't even have a motion, but would we motion to amend the ordinance?
No, I think this
are
is
we good?
fine.
Okay.
I've got notes,
Cool.
they
Great.
make sense to me
This is just
now.
Great.
it's on track.
Yeah, great,
I'll look
great,
at,
so, okay.
it's all just a draft.
Fabulous, okay. So then let's move now to the last part of the discussion, which is the traditional turf height restriction. Would anybody like to reopen this particular part of the conversation?
Well, I can sort
Steve?
of tell you where this goes.
Yes.
I think it's going to be whatever the height that anyone other than Percentage and I would insist on, because I think either of us would go with whatever limit anybody else would go to.
Okay.
So-
Okay, so Prasenjit and Steve, it appears there's no ceiling. There's no ceiling for Prasenjit and Steve. So that leaves it up to Lisa and Patty and myself to put a ceiling on this.
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay, so when we know where we are. All right, Patty, you might actually be the floor,
That's right.
representing the floor.
That's right.
Okay, would you propose it remain at, don't let me put what you
No,
know.
I propose it remains at 6 inches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Lisa, it's us.
All right, and as I said in the previous discussion, I am open to making that a bit higher, 8 inches or 10. I'd be comfortable with, maybe 8 is a good compromise, and maybe in the future, if that all works out, a future board comes and amends that to be a bit higher, but it's been 6 for a long time, and so I think raising it a little bit at this point, rather than a lot, might be a good incremental step. But I am in favor of raising it
Okay.
ever so slightly.
Okay, so I believe that puts our floor at an 8, because I would say my opinion would be either 8 or 10. So I think if we're looking at consensus here, I could possibly push it to 10, but then I would also consider 8. So I feel like I've put myself in the hot seat somehow.
Well, can you
Um,
just get,
yeah.
again, what is the benefit to having it being higher? Is
Mhm.
it just strictly the lawnmower, or is it, what is it?
For me, it mostly relates to climate change. It's not really about aesthetics. I think that we have good ideas about maintenance, so I'm not really worried about invasive species or that kind of thing.
So if I may comment, I think the question is, in my mind, I'm answering my perspective. What does a higher height achieve? There are two things. One is less use of energy and less use of lawnmowers. And number two is when the grass is actually higher, or if you allow some amount of weeds or some amount of impurity and it's actually higher, it's better for the animals such as bees and so on. So they find at least something a little more nourishing. I think maybe if it's just turf grass a few more inches higher, it doesn't help that much, but if it has some amount of weeds, it helps them. And from that perspective, I am supportive of that. I think you mentioned one thing which I will look up. I was trying to look it up. The clippings are now bigger, and will that cause problems to our waterways and so on? And I did not see that much of a difference with what we are talking about, 2 to 4 inches more in the clippings. And the clippings also don't, they get mushed up and cut more than once. So they're saying that it doesn't create, just the length doesn't create a problem. Of course, there will be a little more mass. So on the balance, I'm still, I'll take 10, but I'll take whatever comes out, like Steve said.
Okay, so I have a quick question about lawn mowing equipment. You can tell me anything because I don't know anything about it. So, practically speaking, do lawnmowers have settings at 10 inches of grass cutting, or are they kind of max out at 8? It seems like a really high, well, that's a kind of a high setting for a lawnmower. They're kind of low pro kind of things. So
Yeah,
somebody would have to like weed whack that if they wanted to maybe.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue is once turf grass gets to that height,
Yeah.
mowing it with a residential lawnmower, unless you have something
Right.
with a real strong engine, is gonna
Right.
have a hard time cutting through it.
Right.
I'm
So
trying to cut it short.
Yeah, when you're trying to cut it short, right. I mean, I don't know that you could set your deck to 8
And probably that
inches.
was no more residential.
that's what I think.
I
So
mean, you wanna really keep your feet away from that.
your torso even.
But, yeah, your
I
torso,
mean,
yeah.
so practically speaking, even if we bumped it to 10, I don't see somebody who's wanting to manage a turf lawn at 10 inches, not just applying for a green infrastructure meadow, free permit. So, I think that maybe we're actually splitting hairs about this, so.
I've looked at a
Bless you.
number of ordinances
Yeah.
in teeing this up, and a majority, an overwhelming majority of municipal ordinances, for whatever it's worth, are 6 inches. There are some that are 8, there's a few that's 10, Hazelton, New Berlin Borough, Lower Windsor Township is 12. So you do find some
Okay.
deviation from that, but a majority of them are at 6. But I would say 6, 8 inches, you know, are probably very comparable. Once you get into 10 inches or more, as we start to enforce, if it grows to a foot or more, property owners are gonna have a hard time getting into
Yeah.
compliance, because they
Right.
wouldn't have perhaps equipment to maintain that. Like Mr. Miller said, you'd probably be weed whipping or contracting out in order to get it down to, you know, where you're at a reasonable, compliant height.
Right, okay, so, all right, so then, since I'm in the hot seat, I'll say, for the iteration of this ordinance that we send to the tree commission, and I'm assuming we still plan to send it to the tree commission, because I haven't heard otherwise, can we go with 8? Can we go with 8 inches, a change of 8 inches? And it seems like we have consensus on that in terms of, there's a floor and there's an endless ceiling, and Lisa and I are actually deciding that. So, does that seem like consensus, that 8 is the middle place where, and
Yes,
you're
to move
in,
it
you
forward, yes.
disagree, but yes.
To move it forward, let's go
Okay,
8, yes.
so, is that clear then? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So put an 8 in there, see what the tree commission says to us, says to it, and then I'm assuming you're bringing it back to us after that.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
after we work in some of the draft, we'll pass it by the tree commission and bring it back with any changes that they've recommended for the board to look at, and if ready, authorize for public hearing.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was reading and listening at the same time and was not successful. So you're gonna,
Tree commission?
but first you're gonna make the changes we discussed and then goes to, okay, fantastic, thank you very much, all right.
I just want to also
Yes.
note too, again, I think I mentioned it in the last meeting when we talked about this. The number of electric mowers presented is remarkable. I mean, even on campus, they're everywhere now.
Maybe you should have an electric mower exemption from this.
Maybe.
Okay,
Maybe.
I didn't really introduce that, okay. Okay, I think that discussion is closed. Let's move on to the Musser Gap Trail Proposed Bike Path Official Map Amendment discussion. This will be presented to us tonight by Jenna Wargo, Director of Planning and Zoning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In October 2017, the Board of Supervisors adopted the township's official map designed to implement the goals and community vision set forth in the Center Region Comprehensive Plan. The Board of Supervisors directed township staff to research the implications of amending the official township map to identify the Musser Gap Trail as a proposed path. So provided with the agenda is a memorandum from myself dated July 14th, and it provides an overview of the official map, its benefits, and the process once an official map is adopted. And I can quickly go through that spiel. An official map, it's a community planning tool. It identifies specific parcels or portions of private property within a municipality where public rights-of-way, public easements, public open spaces are envisioned. More specifically, Article 4 of the MPC provides the authority to governing bodies to make or cause to be made an official map of all or portion of the municipality, and may show appropriate elements or portions of elements of the comprehensive plan, so it's Center Region's comprehensive plan, in regard to public lands and facilities. And that includes proposed public streets, water courses, widenings, proposed public parks, playgrounds, open space, railroad, transit right-of-way, and easements. So this is, a map is adopted by ordinance. It's a declaration, essentially, to reserve private land for future public acquisition and use. So while it can be used to set aside land use for future use, an official map does not impose eminent domain on property. A municipality must use methods authorized under the law to acquire the property reserved on the official map. So those methods include negotiation and then condemnation proceedings. Municipalities must follow the adoption process to enact an official map. That's all specified in Section 402 of the MPC. The adoption process is similar to standard land use ordinance adoption processes, but it requires additional steps. With most land use regulations, referral to the municipal and county planning agencies for review is required, but it also sometimes requires adjacent municipalities review in certain circumstances. So the adoption of an official map, it serves as a notice of reservation and intent of the governing body to acquire land for future public improvements. The reservation is put in place by the official map, does not exist in perpetuity. The official map functions a lot like right of first refusal for the local government to purchase private property. So the governing body must act to purchase the private property reserved by the official map for public purpose or give up its right after the property owner announces their intention to develop a property that is identified on the official map. The ordinance essentially fixes the time up to 1 year within acquisition must occur or condemnation must begin. The official map provides a focus for various agencies and boards to identify needed road improvements, widenings, wellhead protection areas, parks, playgrounds. So the official map, it does complement zoning, and it serves as a valuable tool to help implement the comprehensive plan and the capital improvement plan. Is there any questions?
Thank you so much, Jenna. I appreciate that memo and your explanation. Very, very clear. Any questions first? Let's just hold this to questions first, and then let's go into discussion. Any questions for Jenna about the memo or what she's presented? Okay, it looks like no questions, Jenna. And so just to then reiterate a few main points that are really important, and Jenna can correct me if I'm reiterating these incorrectly. The potential designation on the official map does not mean that we're doing a taking at that time. If we wanted to use eminent domain, there's a separate process, and that process could be potentially triggered if what? If a land development plan is submitted for the land? And also, we, at that time, wouldn't need to move forward with a proceeding. It would be a point where we would consider.
So when an area is designated on the official map, those property owners would provide the municipality with essentially a notice of that they plan on subdividing, building, whatever. We as a municipality, we have 1 year to negotiate the purchase of that property. or that area that we designated. There are a lot of benefits to having that on an official map due to the ability to negotiate. If it wasn't on an official map, the process to take property would be eminent domain. There isn't really negotiation when it comes to that. It's, you pay for the price of the land. So typically, a lot of municipalities, they will put future parks on these official maps. If there's a development in that area, that's part of that park that was designated. Part of the negotiations, what I've seen is that the developer would build the park to township specs and give it to the township. As opposed to eminent domain, you just would be paying for that slice of land. The township is then taking on the responsibility to build the park, maintain it, et cetera.
Can I just maybe add a little
Sure.
bit to I'm gonna remember which mic to speak into, a little bit to Jenna's response. You know, an official map designation is really, I think, as Ms. Denny pointed out, separate from the condemnation process that we would go through for eminent domain. The value really is in that stay of 1 year that's placed on any property that has a designation. We're still restricted as a government unit by the eminent domain code for condemnation proceedings, meaning it can't just be for any purpose. It has to be for a specific public use that's enabled by the eminent domain code. Eminent domain, which we do use frequently and not to the point of condemnation typically, does have a process built in for fee simple negotiation and transfer of land. In fact, that's required before you issue a notice of intent to condemn, the preliminary notice of intent to condemn. So, you know, your first order is always to acquire through fee simple negotiation. Failing that, a municipality has the ability to acquire through eminent domain proceedings, paying a fair market value for the cost of that land as determined by the municipality's appraiser. A property owner who's subject to condemnation proceedings is then able to file a preliminary objection to what that value is. That doesn't change the fact that the municipality acquires that property through eminent domain, but it gives them an avenue to dispute the consideration for that property through what's called a board of view, which is kind of an arbitration proceeding that both parties present their testimony, kind of a quasi-judicial environment, and then the board of view decides what an appropriate consideration for that property is. Oftentimes it's kind of a split between what the municipality pays and what the condemnee is suggesting it's worth. But really, that matter is not really relevant to the official map because you're not enabled as a political subdivision to take property by any other means because you've designated it for such acquisition on an official map. Its real benefit is only in that if a development proposal is submitted, the municipality has that full year to decide whether or not we want to acquire it through fee simple negotiations, or failing that, whether, if it were eligible, whether we would pursue eminent domain and condemnation. So just a little nuance, but
Thanks, Dave.
really important.
And then even a little more nuance is you can acquire it by fee simple negotiations, or in the case of what's explained here in Jenna's memo, it looks like an easement, and could be also something that would be acquired.
Right, an easement is just another type of land transfer. It doesn't transfer the entire rights to the property. The property itself, the underlying property, is still owned by the property owner, but the easement holder has whatever rights are ascribed in that easement. Might be a pedestrian access easement, might be a stormwater maintenance easement, might be some other purpose, and depending on what that purpose is, the value of that easement goes up or down. Pedestrian easements are the most costly because that gives public rights to access, walk up and down them, whatever. Other types of easements and encumbrances that don't give that same right may be a little bit less expensive.
Thank you very much, Dave. Okay, those actually were kind of questions, but All right, let's have some discussion about this, and the question is, that was proposed that led to this agenda item is the board interested in making a designation on the official map of the proposed pedestrian easement, bikeway, pathway, that would connect Whitehall Road Regional Park with the Musser Gap Trail. And just as a reminder to those that aren't as familiar with this issue that might be watching at a later time, the region has purchased and is developing that asset of Whitehall Road Regional Park. And the region partnered with Clearwater Conservancy to purchase the Musser Gap Trailhead and then turn it over to DCNR. So this is really about connecting these two very important recreation assets with the always intended pedestrian / bikeway path through the adjacent parcel. So let's have some discussion on whether we'd like to utilize this tool to designate that particular bikeway, pedestrian pathway on our official map. And as Dave mentioned, what that would give to us is not eminent domain of that, but to enable the township to negotiate should there be a subdivision or land development plan eminent for that parcel. It would give us that year to consider whether we would like to move to acquire either that piece through fee simple or to acquire an easement through there. Steve?
Like I said, I would just say, there's no downside, as far as I can see, to putting it on the official map, because the university has expressed an intention a number of times over the last 12 years or so to use that area as a multi-use pathway. And the most likely outcome of anything, if there was a development proposal, would be that municipality and the university would agree together to continue that. The only reason I see to possibly go forward with it as the official map is administration's change and board's change.
Yep.
And so, you know, at some time in the future, it provides us not just a reminder that there was a commitment or an intention expressed, but a way to follow through with it if that changed. I don't anticipate it would change, but it's always a possibility, so.
Well put.
I'll go, because I'm just going to echo what Steve just said. You know, I'm under the understanding that it's Penn State's intention to not build on that area, but to use it as a natural, you know, whatever, a pathway and, you know, preserve that as a natural area. But like you just said, you know, people change positions, and I think this would be just a good indication for the future of what had been the intention at this time in that area. So, and you know, I was just looking at the official map. So we have the path on there. Or the trail. The trail's already identified on there. So you would be suggesting to label that as a under proposed facilities as a proposed multi-use path or something to that effect.
So I am looking at the official map, and I'm wondering if we're looking at the same thing here. I don't have mine super blown up, but if you look at the parcel of Whitehall Road Regional Park, which is greened out, and then you drop down toward Route 45, you see a little red squiggle. That is the Musser Gap Trail, and what I'm thinking we're talking about is extending that little red squiggle till it hits the Whitehall Road Regional Park parcel. So the Musser Gap Trail is there, but only in a fragment. Perhaps Dave, I don't know, is it screen sharing possible, or is that, or maybe I should be asking Jenna that on the Zoom.
Yeah, Jenna, you can share screen.
Could you maybe hone in on that area we're talking about? While Jen is doing that, I'll add that, yeah, in echoing Lisa and Steve, yes, and Penn State was also participating in the master plan for the Whitehall Road Regional Park, which shows this connector to that. And I'm really feeling the, administration change with knowing that Steve is going to be going off the board and losing the history of, folks that have been participating in projects. This is absolutely a way to help continue that knowledge through iterations of board and whatnot. So you can see on the far right of the screen the large rectangle, the strobe light screen. Is everything okay?
It's weird.
Oh, I see.
So do you see the yellowish, it appears, rectangle of Whitehall? Yeah, there's I don't have my little dot today. But Dave has his cursor on it.
The part that shows
Actually,
there
that's
is the
Jenna's.
part that's already been constructed.
That down, yep, down
The
there.
rest of it right now is a farm road.
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
The intention has been to,
Connect.
to continue construction with trail surface aggregate all the way up to the park.
And so with the official map, at least when we had discussed it before, it's really irrelevant as to the actual pathway, unlike in a land development plan where the actual pathway matters a lot. In this, it's just the designation of the line across the parcel that's the general idea of making that crossing.
Yeah, it makes even more sense when you see the red part that's already built
Yeah,
of that and just connecting that.
yeah. Thank you for the screen share. Does Prasenjit or Patty, do either of you want to add anything to the discussion?
Nope, I think you
I-
covered it all.
Okay, Patty just said she thought we had covered it all. And Prasenjit, did you want to, okay, we got a thumbs up from Prasenjit. So I have a quick question for Jenna. So Jenna, I just am recalling that in our last time we discussed the official map changes, we had said something like, because we added the ag easements onto it, we had said something like, whenever we update the official map in any way, we'll also automatically update any changes to that data layer. Okay, cool, because if not, I guess we would have to actually discuss that, but if we move forward with this change, the assumption is that those parcels will be updated, because that's not really a change we have to make. Okay.
And I would just say, it's not a lot of urgency we do this quickly. And updating the official map is a bit of a process so we have to consider if there's anything else we would want to do at the same time,
Well,
rather than, it's
Piecemeal.
not something you really want to do piecemeal if there are other things that.
yeah, I
should be
was
on.
thinking about those bike trails, like connecting to the Huntington, somebody had brought it up before.
Yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think that it might be worthwhile taking a little bit of time to make sure that if there are other things, we include them at the same time, so we're not doing one and then a year later saying, oh, we should have done this too. Let's make another amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, question for Dave for process then. All right. So I think the board is in consensus that we want to move forward with preparing this amendment to the official map of that specific pathway we just talked about. Obviously, we're going to be updating the ag easements. It seems like the board is in alignment that there may be other things that we want to look at. How will this, I know that the process is kind of long. Who all does it go to for review in a mandatory manner? And then who do we want to include in a helpful extra manner, like our own ABCs? And just briefly, let's hit the timeline for how this rolls out.
Timeline?
Or, I'm sorry, not
It is-
timeline per se, but just like, this comes and then that goes, okay.
It is an ordinance, so we would have to follow that process, public hearing, and, you know, we would want to prepare that first, present it back to the board for authorization. It is zoning relevant, so, you know, you'd want to
PC.
have planning commission, Center Region Planning Commission, Center County have a chance to provide comment on it. Whether that's mandatory, I would say the Center Region Planning Commission and Township Planning Commission, both certainly advisable. If it's something that is limited to the focus that was discussed now, probably not a whole lot of time to, you know, bring it back in front of you all. If you start to open it up again, remember the one we adopted in October 2017, we'd worked on for almost 2 years.
Long time.
Right, so
Yeah.
it took a very long time, and we had a lot of input, we had several work sessions
Yeah.
that were attributed, or, you know, these board meeting discussions, that fed into it, so, and we had, you know, we had turnover at this, that was when the previous manager was retiring, and I was transitioning in, so there were some delays that were not related to this, but, it certainly took a fair amount of time. So I guess it kind of depends on
Okay.
on how broad you want to make the scope of it.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
But basically, we would definitely be sending it to the Planning Commission, CRPC, and simultaneously Center County. We also would be holding a public hearing. Before we have the public hearing, obviously, we want the board's alignment around the changes that are made, so we can advertise the proper ordinance for public hearing.
If you were adding in recreation, you'd probably want to maybe engage the Parks Committee as kind of an optional, but might be good if you include that.
Are we also required to allow neighboring municipalities to comment? I
Jenna,
know
do you have
traditionally we
any,
do, but I don't know if that's
Yeah.
a requirement.
Maybe through CRPC that happens.
is there any requirement in the MPC, Municipal Planning Code,
For what?
for a comment period for neighboring municipalities?
Or only with certain features, like a road that's gonna go into their municipality or something like that.
Yeah, there was a certain clause to have a neighboring municipality review it. And I don't think it was related to this, or I would have paid closer attention to it.
Cool. And then in terms of changes, sorry, Dave.
It's
did
probably
you-
good practice, particularly if you're putting a line up to another municipality.
Yeah.
I know when Half Moon Township did theirs, they gave us an
Yeah, I know we
opportunity.
traditionally have done that. I
Yeah.
just didn't know if it was
Oh,
required.
that's
I'm not
right.
sure either, but I know we have.
That's right. So this particular change doesn't really touch another municipality, but we could send it to them, I guess, anyway, Harrison. It's like really close to a joining point of Harrison College right there, so it's like, yeah,
Yeah, wouldn't hurt.
yeah. Also, the borough is very close too, I think.
It's one of those
It's one of
points.
those places, like the Four Corners. Okay, so I think that we should probably, I guess, should we schedule another discussion with the board, kind of rapid fire, so then we can kind of move it along to the next level? I think probably either before the next meeting or the one following, the board could probably get an idea of any other additional changes to propose. I don't really have anything off the top of my head, but it sounds like Patty had brought to the table, bikeways,
Yeah,
right?
there's, I guess, the old rail bed that goes out through your end of town, you know, maybe as a connectedness for bike trails.
Okay, so, I could definitely see us taking a look at the connected trail ways. Is there anything else just that pops to mind for folks that?
All right, and I
Yeah.
wasn't proposing a comprehensive overhaul.
Yeah, me either, just a
Saying if there
spot
are other
check,
things,
yeah,
We ought to
Yeah.
take a look at them now.
Yeah.
instead of
Agree.
some other time.
perfect. Okay, so Dave, could we, schedule another discussion with the board for any mop-up and then move it through the process?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay, great. Sounds like some direction there. I'm gonna ask if we can take a break recess. All right, thank you. Please. I must.
I don't know who you're asking.
Not unless we keep it at 6
Hey,
inches.
you're the chair.
Whacking the gavel. Okay, BRB. Steve, I'm on a mission to get us to that beer after this.
Okay.
We aren't on scene right now, are we?
Okay.
Or, wait, are
That's
we on
allowed.
Zoom right
You're
now?
both 21 or of age or
We are
older.
on- But I know, but we are on Zoom right now, right? Like, can you guys hear us?
Yeah,
Just
you're-
nobody
yeah.
there.
No, you're totally
Well,
What's happening?
Everybody went to go.
Oh, brother.
That won't even make the top 10 of things.
Bloopers?
Yeah, blooper things that were sent on CNET.
I'm sure not. I missed their blooper reels
Oh, that would be so
much.
funny
Yeah,
if
me too.
CNET did do like that, a bloopers.
They did.
They
used-
did?
Yeah, it got,
It was a lot of work for them,
yeah.
and some people didn't have good sense of humor.
My favorite line still is Peter saying alligators are more dangerous than chickens.
It's back to order, and we are moving into our new business. First up on the agenda is the consent agenda. So I would entertain a motion to approve.
Mrs. Patty, I move that we approve the consent agenda as listed.
Second?
I have a question.
Yep.
So I wanted to pull out the special events permit for the Pregnancy Resource Clinic. I didn't understand what this is about, and
Okay, we'll pull that out then and add that to new business at the end.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve minus the special events permit. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Next up, the award of a contract for consulting services to update the Ferguson Township Recreation Park and Open Space Plan, introduced by Dave Prabalka.
Thank you. So the township issued a request for proposals, or RFP, to help us select a consultant to facilitate an update to the township's Recreation Park and Open Space Plan, RPOS plan. I'll try to limit my acronyms here. The plan was last updated in 2009, and best practice says it should be updated every 5 years. So we're a little bit behind the curve on that. That's okay. We do have a budgeted line item in the 2021 operating budget to accomplish this task. It was deferred from 2020 because of COVID. We received a number of qualified proposals. That number was narrowed down to 2, which were moved by an internal review team that was comprised of township staff. It was then moved on to the Ferguson Township Parks and Recreation Committee for their review and a recommendation for an award. Both of the top 2 finalists, or both the two finalist proposals are included with your agenda. There's also a copy of the RFP that was issued for the project. The Parks and Recreation Committee recommended that the board award the contract to YSM Landscape Architects in an amount of $39,300, which reflects the motion that's included in your agenda. As I noted, the township's internal review team did rank both of those as our top 1 and 2. HRG just kind of outpassed YSM in the internal staff review. So we the Parks Committee and the internal staff team, it came down on slightly different results or recommendations on this award, but staff is very confident, including myself, that either firm is qualified and will be able to deliver on the scope of work requested. I can answer any questions on our review, but the recommendation that was forwarded from the Parks Committee is what's included with the agenda.
Thank you very much, Dave. All right, I'd like to have some discussion before I entertain a motion. And I just wanted to also add a little bit of context for me as I thought about this, and I wanted to open that up to board discussion. And that is that at our last meeting, or maybe the one before, sorry, I'm losing track, I think it was the last one, we had learned about the strategic plan timeline. We were a little bit concerned about the compacted timeline, not so much so that we didn't think we could manage that, but the context that we're looking at for this open space plan is placed within the context of the strategic plan for the township. I guess I'll add that in addition to this being bumped from 2020, it was also, I'm pretty sure, in the 2019 budget that we had bumped it. And so the previous board, when we were looking at doing this, we're really thinking it would come almost midway between strategic planning sessions as opposed to simultaneous with a strategic planning session. So I guess I have some concerns about undertaking both of those major projects at the same time, including the public involvement that we want to have in both of them, and the staff involvement, and the board involvement, and the ABC involvement. So I would like to contextualize our conversation tonight about contract award in that larger question of managing both of these projects and thinking about that a little bit as a board. So with that, I would open things up to discussion. Steve?
Well, I guess I looked through the two proposals, and I tend to favor the HRG proposal. I felt that it followed our RFP a little better, and I really had a better feel for what the process would be and how it would fit into. So, I know we got a recommendation from a committee, but, ultimately it's up to us to decide it, and I would favor the HRG proposal, not necessarily overwhelmingly, but just I thought it was better. One question I had, though, on that, is there's an ad alternate of 15,000 in there, and I couldn't find, I had trouble figuring out what it is, and the document wasn't showing completely when I was looking at it. And I don't know. Because the two were comparable in price, but then there was an ad alternate from HRG, and I don't know what it was.
Yep, I'm just scrolling down to that. I know
Looks like you're
it's
having trouble
toward the
reading it,
end.
Yeah, where finding it, I know what you're talking
It's
about.
page
and
I
I have a gut response, but I want to
Yeah.
confirm it before.
It's toward the end, yeah, or at the end. And
Yeah, so,
some of the phrasing got cut off.
Oh, there it is.
What they did,
39,
HRG
38.
was trying to be sensitive to our budget limitation. So it was they gave us a few, so they had a deduct alternate under option B,
Right.
which kind of pared down the scope to 27,000.
The ad
Ad
alternate,
alternate, I think really should,
it was for Three Parks Capital, Three Parks.
master plans.
Master plans,
Oh,
yeah.
So
Okay.
it kind of
So
added
That's what
in
got cut off.
It's inexpensive.
that additional component if we wanted to
Okay.
specifically look at parks that we wanted updates to the master plan. So I think what HRG did in preparing the proposal was look at our capital program and noted that we have
Yeah.
master plan updates for Greenbrier Saybrook Park, for
Fairbrook.
Fairbrook Park, and for,
Is it Homestead maybe, or?
yeah, either Homestead or Tudak, or one other park, I can't remember offhand which, and then just kind of lump that into their proposal
Okay,
too.
that-
We wouldn't likely do that
That's what I couldn't
project
figure out
as
was
well.
what they were proposing there as the end.
It looks a little bit interesting to me, though, because if they're immersed in all of our information, and that's a really good price for 3 master plans, but, I mean, obviously, I don't know what all would be included in that, because normally we pay about 25,000 per, and this is 3 for 15, so that's a really good price, but they must
It's the
not.
same thing.
Right, if products are equivalent and everything, but, okay, so, Steve had focused, his support on the,
Yeah, the other thing in terms of you talking about the amount of things going on at once, I did, one reason I could see to go ahead sooner rather than later is we have asked for more information on cost of maintaining and, do in-house maintenance on parks, that sort of thing. And I think it might be that this kind of study would provide a lot of that otherwise would be staff coming up with. I don't know, but I think it would, yeah.
It'd be nice. And part of, I think, where HRG ranked highly with a staff review was because they incorporated in their proposal and along with their consulting team, a specific concerted financial analysis. So, that would be beneficial to us. I don't know whether, I'm sure YSM would be capable. They didn't incorporate that in their response.
thanks, Dave, and that's a good point, Steve.
Yeah, thought both proposals were well done, but when I looked at the HRG proposal, it actually made me excited for the process, because one of the things that I would love to see the township incorporate in its park planning is some creative and natural play spaces. And as soon as I opened their proposal, that was the first thing I saw, was nature play and adventure play and splash pads, which is a thing I always hear requested. And then one other thing I thought they did well was they would actually look at the physical characteristics of the township. So our DCNR related properties, it said steep slopes and waterways. So really looking at the township as a whole, and that helped emphasize in their plan the open space portion, which I didn't see as much in the other plan. And then they also talked a lot about connectivity, which is a big component of, the recreation part of it. So it just seemed a little more encompassing of what we were looking at. They mentioned monthly meetings with either staff or the Parks Committee. I wasn't exactly sure, but I thought that was a great frequency. And then the financial planning component that they included. I think that's interesting about the master planning for those three parks, because I'd been a little bit curious about how this plan was going to work with those three master plans for our township parks. And so that's interesting to me that they noticed that, and then also that they'd be available to do that and willing and at that price. So I thought that was something maybe to consider down the road. And then just to your point about the timing with the strategic plan, the other thing we have is the TSD rewrite. So that would be another plan we'd be participating in. So I can see that timing concern, but this, I thought this was such a good proposal. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Lisa.
So I have a question, in the sense that I'm sort of still trying to figure out things in this one and get some background information and so on. So how time critical is this? And what are the implications of, assuming, again, the board wants to do it, tabling this and figuring out a better solution?
Thanks, Prasenjit. I had just a similar question, I think. And so, Dave, if I think the board had a brief overview of the expectations for the strategic plan. I'm having trouble, remembering all those details and knowing when this is going to overlap. Is it overlapping for the whole period? Does the strategic plan right now, I think it finishes up first and then this is longer. How could you give us right now, I don't want to put you on the spot and we can certainly defer this to another time, but right now and or later, could you give us an idea of what you're imagining, how those overlap and those demands play out together?
Yeah, I think you're right. They would overlap to a degree. The intent or the hope is, well, we don't have proposals back on the strategic plan, that we would wrap that up, before calendar year. That's going to be something that I'd be, your primary staff person working on. Centrise Martin, assistant manager, would be taking the lead on the RPOS plan, likely working in concert with myself and Jenna, but it would be, as a planning director, she would be the primary, kind of resource that would be engaging with the consultant and working on facilitation. So I think from a management of our resources perspective, we can accommodate the strategic plan, the RPOS plan, and then next year the Terrace Streetscape District rewrite with our current capacity. I'll put an asterisk on that it depends on some other things too, but I don't have any real concerns. These items were all on the radar, so as we are putting together our work plans for the year, these are three things that we've already kind of budgeted in terms of our work plan.
Okay, and then could you just in terms of dates, so I was looking at the timeline here, for example, for HRG, it's, basically it would be immediately starting at the staff level. And wasn't that also for the strategic plan, when was that to begin? That theoretically to begin? So we are definitely looking at here then this beginning before the.
Correct, that's correct.
Okay.
This would start before, I believe the plan to award the strategic plan consultant is in the second meeting in September, or first meeting October.
Okay.
Around there. I have a schedule I could pull up, but I'd have to refer back to it. But this would initiate before the strategic plan rewrite. The strategic plan is going to have a component of public involvement, of course. It's going to be board-centric, though. So,
Right.
you'll have a lot of responsibility and involvement for providing input. It's not going to be, even though it seems like it should be because it's the plan, it's not going to be as involved and detailed as you might get in the RPOS plan.
Right.
It's going to be more the high-level policy setting, goal-setting kinds of discussions. That should take a lot less time than the RPOS plan, which is presumably more detailed.
Okay. All right. Patty, did you want to offer any feedback on the consultants?
No, basically, I just concur with what everybody else has said. I really did, I thought they were both good proposals, and I did feel like the HRG is that the right
Yeah.
letters? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The PDQ, no.
Right, the
HRG.
RPOS or the HRG is right.
I thought they sort of captured a more of sort of the same vibe that we have here, their multidisciplinary approach, and bringing a lot. So I lean towards that one, but I agree with what everybody else had said. I have nothing really to add.
Thank you very much, Patty. And Prasenjit, did you want to make any specific comments then on either of the specific proposals that we're taking a look at here? The HRG or YSM for the RPOS?
Yeah, I've tried to figure things out, but I think I can't say in this one I have a very clear winner in my eyes. And yeah, there are certain things in the HRG plan which were very nice and I liked. But then this, it's hard to say. And to some extent, I was looking at what projects they have done and looking at more their work than whether they can produce a glossy brochure. I think the tone of the brochure, or the tone of, no, I wouldn't say brochure, the proposal. The tone of the proposal matters, and I was impressed with some things that HRG said. I was also impressed with some of the long experience and projects that the YSM have done. So in this case, I was more thinking of getting to a point based on the board's discussion and relying on others' preferences and leaning on that. But yeah, so that's why I asked if I can get some more time. But this is where I am. If I have to vote today, I'll figure out something and vote. But I would prefer to get some more time. That's where I am.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so I think that I'm still a little bit grappling with the timing, but I'm feeling a little bit better about it than I did coming into the discussion. So I'll comment then on the proposals. I felt like HRG did a really good job of giving me specific examples of how they were going to show me information that I need to make good decisions. And so, for example, talking about assessing the parks, but even going to the point of assessing the condition of the amenities within the parks to help us understand what our maintenance and replacement plan should look like moving forward. So giving us very concrete facts to work with instead of kind of a surface more overview, which we already have from the regional comprehensive plan. So a lot of that very basic inventory that YFSM is talking about, we've already got that. What we need is to dig down deep, and that's how I perceived HRG's proposal, is it's digging down deeper. Another thing that I thought was really great, that they actually showed us examples of some of the NRPA data that I've been talking about for various amenities. So they were talking about level of service and what a certain amenity, the people that it might serve in what proximity. So they're really looking at park amenities, even not just a park. So a park serves X amount of people, but do those X amount of people have access to all the various amenities or just certain ones? So again, it looked like they were really doing a nice deep dive into that data. I definitely thought too that HRG has been doing some research about some of the board priorities. I think it's similar to what Patty was saying. They used our grow zone picture. They're acknowledging in multiple places some of the, the ecotourism and that kind of a focus, this larger, broader perspective. I think that that's going to lend itself well to broadening the concept of, publicly owned land, not just parks per se. So I just really valued that approach that they were taking there. So I favored the HRG proposal relatively strongly. The one question I have about it, and then this relates to timeline, they were making an assumption that the township was doing programming. Well, there's two things that I'm concerned about. One, they're making an assumption that the township is doing programming, and that's a very valid assumption because that's almost always how it is. The people that build the parks do the programming because then they know what amenities they have and they know what programs can be hosted there, and it makes a lot of cohesive sense. But we know that that's not the case here, and we have more of a fragmented approach to parks. So this is something that's going to have to be integrated into their proposal. So what we come out with is, the appropriate action items that they might find right in that. So if they're looking at programs that the region is hosting, and they find that there's a mismatch between what our folks want and what they're hosting, the action item is not for the township to host that program necessarily, it's the region to. So it's something they didn't really grapple with there, and I wouldn't expect them to. But my question is gonna be that, and then in another area, which is also like a really unique thing to our park system, is that the whole, how do I say this? We own a legitimate piece of regional parks. So the pools, the Millbrook Marsh Nature Center, the Active Adult Center, but they're not township parks, they're regional facilities. And so when HRG was talking about giving us some understanding of capital improvements that are necessary, which I love that idea. The idea of how they're going to handle the responsibility for those kinds of investments and what all amenities they're going to be including. Because my understanding and the way the previous RPOS plan handled it in Ferguson Township is that those amenities were included in like the inventory and whatnot. And if this consultant is going to take us to the next level and help us do a little strategic planning, which I think is fantastic, we need accurate data to do that. So those kinds of things need to be incorporated in some manner, but I'm not 100% sure what manner. But it's not evident in the proposal. So my question is that something that we can have, I don't know, staff, the chair, the consultant, some sort of a very early meeting about that to align around those quirks that they'll have to manage.
Yes, yes, so there'll be a post-award but pre-kickoff kind of a meeting to maybe massage out some of those details. HRG is very familiar with how we operate in the region. Perhaps it didn't all bear out in the proposal, but they've done, a lot of work here. They're familiar with Center Region Parks and Recreation and how the
Okay.
intergovernmental agreement is handled. So I have no doubt that they can accommodate
Okay,
it. Maybe
great.
it just has to be clarified, and we can do that.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so like, for example, they were like, the agency's governing documents, and I'm like, okay, so who's the agency? Is it Ferguson Township, or is it the park agency, or is it the park authority, right? All of those questions. And so they'll have to handle that complexity, so I'm glad that we think they can, so. Do other board members at this point feel okay about the timing, where we should move forward with a contract award? Or are we still?
I have one more question,
Sure.
and what I'm also grappling with this decision is that I have spent maybe 15 minutes to 20 minutes reading these two documents, and I have heard this discussion. I do want to defer to the recommendations of the staff, and I take it seriously. And they have recommended that this be awarded to ISM, although they did note some concerns. And in that sense, I would like to hear a little bit more more about why staff made the decision to recommend ISM. As I said, from my own reading of the HRG proposal, it seemed a little bit more, there were a little more details about what really are they going to do than the other one looked a little bit as to, okay, these are the things going through the motions types, regular things that you need to have, so they did their due diligence and so on. So I would want to hear a little bit more, if possible, as to how you made this, why this decision was made, and why ISM was chosen over HRG. What are the advantages of ISM versus HRG? And if there is, hopefully tease apart a little bit more from that.
Sure. So, and it's worth mentioning that our internal review, which included myself, the assistant manager, the planning director, and our administrative assistant in the planning department, we were largely, slightly, but mostly of us favored HRG's proposal over YSM because, and I think as Mr. Miller said earlier, they were a little bit more accustomed to the RFP that we issued. YSM's proposal was fairly generic in that it didn't include, like as Mr. Miller pointed out, this financial assessment. They were a little bit leaner than HRG in some of their public engagements. YSM proposed one public meeting early on in the project, and HRG has three that's worked into their proposal. Now we can always add on. But the reason that the staff recommendation is what it is in the agenda is to reflect what the Parks and Recreation Committee recommended. I didn't want to kind of make it, although of course I did, but it wasn't my intention to kind of, make it kind of the, pitting the Parks Committee against staff recommendation. And truth be told, as I said before, I'm confident that either of these firms were both very qualified, would do an effective job. So I didn't feel strongly enough about going against the grain with the recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Committee to put, their recommendation, but then note that staff was kind of at odds with it. The pricing is a little bit lower for HRG than it is for YSM. So while we don't necessarily have to award, we certainly don't have to award to the cheapest as we do for a capital contract. It is a consideration. Both proposals are above our budget allocation, but we understand that we can, we can accommodate that, and of course, because this will spill into 2022, we can rebudget as needed. HRG provided, in the interest of cost containment, as we requested in the RFP, scenario-based models that, if we wanted to pare back the scope to be more in line with our budget, they gave us the option to do so. We're not recommending that we do. We think we can make the full scope work within our means. YSM did not do that. They gave us a one price. I think it's probably reasonable to expect with either of these firms that what you see in the base proposal is probably not. We'll probably have to maybe add an additional public meeting here and there if we feel it's warranted or we want to get more feedback on a specific item. So, that may become more of a problem with YSM, which is, already kind of a, this is, take it or leave it kind of a model, plus, when you add on that cost containment could become more of an issue. What else did I want to say about HRG? The 3 master plans for $15,000, that sounds like it's too good to be true, which means it probably is. But we can tease that out a little bit if the board awards to HRG. So it's kind of, they're kind of minor differences, and the 2 scored very closely in our rubric. And as I said, we're comfortable with either, but HRG did have a slight edge with staff review, whereas the Parks Committee unanimously favored YSM, although several Parks Committee members noted that, that both proposals seemed very reasonable. I think there was some apprehension on the part of the Parks Committee about engaging with HRG. They didn't because of the way the proposal was laid out. It kind of reads, I think you said brochure, and that I think really is a good way to describe it. It really does kind of read like a brochure, which YSM was a little bit more formal in their presentation. So I think part of the Parks Committee recommendation came out of their inability to kind of comprehend all the details of the proposal. And, frankly, I understand that. It was tough to get through HRG's proposal. It's tough to find things in it. It's not laid out the way, I think it probably ought to be most user-friendly.
Thanks, Dave. So Prasenjit, just to also recap, so you had asked why is the staff recommendation YSM, and so I think Dave answered that the staff was just passing forward the Parks Committee recommendation. Their internal review brought HRG to the forefront. And I would concur with what Dave had mentioned. I think the Park Committee definitely struggled with the format of the HRG proposal. And they also questioned the need for the financial the professionals that were included in HRG. So really kind of what I came out of this participating in all the board conversations I've participated in, I could very easily see the good fit that HRG provided for the board, and I think probably staff was able to see that as well, whereas the Parks Committee wasn't really able to see that, and so that very formal formatting of the YSM proposal spoke to them in that manner.
Yeah, I think, so my thinking now is that, and I understand that people who volunteer and work in the ABCs already work a lot of hours. It would have been nice if we had one of them come and give us a summary and a comparison type things. But anyway, yeah, that's an aside. Thanks.
Okay, so I think we've had pretty ample discussion on this. So I'm going to repose. I also think we can all nod for consensus that it seems like, generally speaking, the board is okay with the timing. And any concerns that they're okay. All right, so with that, I will entertain a motion, and then if we would like, we can have further discussion on said motion. So based on the discussion we've had, let's choose which proposal we would like to accept.
Okay, I make a motion that the Board of Supervisors award the contract to HRG in the amount of,
Oh.
whatever is in there.
The
Well,
full proposal amount
No,
or
no,
the deducted?
At this point, the 35,000.
Okay. Okay.
Something. Yeah, but I don't see a reason to take the deduction. So-
39,500.
Okay, so it was about the same amount then. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we have a motion from Mr. Miller to award the contract to HRG for the consulting services to update the Ferguson Township Rec Park and Open Space Plan. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
This is Lisa.
Lisa seconded. Do we have any further discussion? I think most of us have given our full opinions on this. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I believe this is just a voice vote, correct? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously, and Patty, I'm grateful she reminded me, we have the consent agenda item to go back to, which is the special events permit for the Pregnancy Resource Clinic 5K. Prasenjit, I believe you requested this be pulled. Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to find out what our role is with respect to the to this permit, and if it is just sort of standard, anyone who asks that gets that or not. Generally, because I have concerns with this organization, and I would not like as a township to support any endorsement of the organization. There were some controversies in the past, and without getting into the details of that and so on, I just want to make sure what our role is here and that we are not endorsing anything that the organization does in any way.
Right, so it's not an endorsement of the organization. Commonly, when an organization or individual is asking to host an event, whether it be a procession or an assemblage, they'll go through this permit process, which was recently modified by the board, and I was looking to see just real quickly if I could pull the policy up. But anyway, in this particular case, we send these or with this specific event, Chief Albright takes a look at it, and we've done this same event. This event, I think, is going on either its third or fourth year being hosted, partly in the township. I think it goes into other municipalities as well. And firstly, make sure that we can, if we have to dedicate any resources to it, police personnel, public works, barricades, etc., that we have a plan to do that, or that we have the capacity to do it. And then, of course, that it's not going to create any public safety issues or anything. The policy still has a component of board review, and approval, which began back in 2013, because at the time, the staff didn't feel comfortable approving events that would require street closures or would require encroachments in some of our residential neighborhoods, or would dedicate police personnel or other resources without the endorsement of the elected officials. So when I say endorsement, I'm of course not referring to endorsement of the host organization, but just that you're aware of the event. There's an opportunity for anybody who may object to it to come out and have their objections heard. But really, it's a permit approval process, much like maybe a conditional use in zoning that goes in front of the board. You're not obligated to approve it. There's no standard that you're being asked to evaluate the application against to determine whether it should be approved or not. Staff's already reviewed it. We know in this case, we'll put one police officer at least in the areas of the major crossings, so that we know that there's safety is being considered, and we're not going to staff that individual there. They'll go out once or twice throughout the event just to check in on things. There are other special events that require road closures, sidewalk closures that need to have law enforcement there to do the closure. We then charge that organization for the costs of that staff, of staffing those events. So, this one is probably in the area of, it was no closures are warranted, but it's big enough that it has to go through this policy and get board approval.
Thank you, Dave.
I'm glad, President, that you asked, because I did actually look at that, and I noticed, I was concerned, just for safety reasons, that it is a football weekend. And I noticed that. I was like, oh, that's strange, that they're having a bike race.
Right, who does that?
Because it said 8 to 12, and I was like, well, that's a football weekend. It's a football Saturday.
Huh.
And the consent agenda means that it'll come up in the next meeting for proper discussion and vote, and, I have 2 more weeks to figure out my mind, or is it just sort of an approval right now?
This would be an approval right now, as opposed to what, you're referring to, which is the board member requested agenda item process. This is
Okay.
like a pay application or a voucher report or whatever. Approval of the consent agenda item is tantamount to approval of the special events permit.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions or discussion? Steve?
I would just say, I think we should avoid considering the agency that's putting in the application, because this is really a public safety permit, not an endorsement of anyone. And I think we get to a really slippery slope if we start considering who it is that's applying when we decide on a public safety permit. So.
Thanks, Steve. I was also going to point out the public safety nature of it. If it was a group that was notoriously dangerous or had a public safety concern, I think that would be a different
Or a route
situation.
we really had concern about.
Yeah, or a route, yep. I mean, the football weekend thing is a little bit,
Yeah.
but I'm assuming the chief reviewed that when he, yeah. Okay, and
I
with
would
this,
move that we
yeah.
approve the special events permit.
Okay, we have a motion to approve.
I'll second, this is Lisa.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Same sign.
I'll oppose.
Okay, motion passes 4-1. Okay, thank you. Moving on to staff and committee reports. First up, COG committee reports, the Finance Committee. Steve?
I did not review my notes.
Okay.
So I'll just say that the main event is the program plan for COG, and the capital improvement plan will be coming out next week at the general forum. And we'll have a chance to review that and provide comments before August 19th, I believe it is the Finance Committee meeting.
Thanks, Steve. I have a question about that. Do you recall if anything was discussed about the staff raises percentage and being in alignment with the municipalities?
We did not discuss that.
Okay, all right, so that'd be something that our board is
We
taking
could
Okay.
raise that question for discussion there.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Steve? All right, moving on to the Joint Parks Capital and Park and Recreation Authority meeting. We met, when did we meet? Thursday, July 8th, and we reviewed the Millbrook Marsh Nature Center Part 1 Boardwalk Feasibility Study. This has been making the rounds through the various committees, facilities and finance and Parks Capital. Pretty much you'll see that we were in alignment with some of the other committees to move forward. We did not call it an endorsement, but support for the option 3. Here we go with our options again. Option 3, design plus alternatives. So we did not endorse, so we didn't specify the exact motion in here, but we did support that. And we had some questions, and then I also brought some questions up in the authority meeting, because they also are talking about this, about what the funding plan is for this design option. So the alternatives that have been added into the repair and base work total about $900,000, more than $900,000. And I'm not gonna get the exact number right, but I believe now the total for this project is 2.19 million or 2.91 million. I'm sorry, I'm reversing those numbers and it matters. But so those additional options, alternatives increase the cost. There's not yet a specific funding strategy in place, and yet we're all supporting this idea. We're supporting it. So I did voice the concern about supporting something that we don't have the funding for. When we're talking a lot about fundraising being significant, just what percentage of that should we expect to be fundraised while we're supporting this question or this amount? And then I didn't raise it in the Parks Capital Committee, but I had been thinking about it, and I did raise it to the Park Authority, and I'm going to raise it now. Some of those choices that we're making in the alternatives, I think they're relatively good choices because you're increasing the accessibility for folks. So they're changing some grass trails to TSA trails. So you're gonna have more accessibility for folks who are in wheelchairs. But also with that, I'm always a big fan of thinking about how our capital investment affects operations. So with using TSA, you'll see at Fairbrook Park that what that typically entails is also then application of herbicide. Because that TSA is a compacted gravel, and you have mowing in the park, and then the mowers throw the grass scraps onto the TSA, and similar with curb and sidewalk maintenance, they then root and grow things because they're like making dirt, and then you have to apply herbicide. So I suggested at the authority meeting, because TSA is already so expensive and you have to do all that base engineering work, we should consider a different materials cost and pave them, because if you're going to make it impermeable anyway, why not make it impermeable in a way that doesn't require herbicide applications in a sensitive marsh area, which was being discussed at that time too. And that is why we're going for the more expensive materials, right, that don't leach chemicals into the marsh. We care about it in the more expensive materials and the pressed timber. We should care about it in this respect too. It will probably further increase the price, but in terms of operations, maybe it's consistent with our values. So sorry, I'm really delving into my report here, but I thought it was important to bring that up. We need to continually think about capital investments and then how that affects operations. At the authority, I also asked, is Penn State interested in contributing to this, because what we plan will last beyond the terms of our lease. So we know that also Penn State owns it. They have staff that are working on this, I believe in a volunteer capacity. I'm not 100% sure about that. But it's aligned with their values. Is this something they want to invest in? After that discussion, one of the gentlemen who is with Penn State said to me that although they're only providing some staff support right now, they're interested in knowing what a number is. They want a capital number, and I think that we should advocate the authority providing them with a number that they can debate upon. Because if we never ask, we'll never get an answer. So I think that as we watch that move forward, we really need to take that gentleman's word and make an ask there for that important partnership. We also talked about the Ferguson Township effort to put on the map the Musser Gap Greenway connection, and the committee decided to move that forward and asked staff to draft a letter, not necessarily of support for Ferguson Township, but to pursue public access of that connector. So we also shied away from the word easement because Sharima Young, who is the non-voting member that represents Penn State University mentioned that while the university is not necessarily enthusiastic of a full easement discussion, they are kicking around more an idea of an MOU. So we wanted to leave that open-ended. We're not too concerned about exactly what it is. We just want guaranteed access. So move that forward. We had an update on Whitehall Road Regional Park. They're still preparing the bids. Some of you have heard about the light question. I believe it's, in order to secure a good cost for the lights, they must purchase them very soon, and they need to then be stored because they can't install them until 2023. So everyone is looking for an appropriate storage location for these lights. I had a question about, I had also heard, I'm not sure where, that these lights are also being funded by some of the loan. And that confused me because hearkening back to the question of what's fundraised and what's provided by the municipalities, I was pretty sure that those lights were in the all fundraised bucket. So I am trying to get an answer on this question. And I would love for maybe staff to help us with that answer are the lights coming out of the loan budget, or are they indeed fully fundraised? There's some wobbling on that. Next, we had a division of responsibilities for maintenance and operations discussion. Really, this is just a learning process for the elected officials. We're all learning that, for example, all of the municipalities are guided by the same agreement. It's not an MOU, it's less formal than that, but it's implemented a wee bit differently, just has evolved that way. So we just had a very preliminary discussion about this and what we might want to do. We're going to continue discussion, very preliminary. Then we looked at the regional park master plan review and amendment process, which doesn't exist, and talked a little bit about making a process, which came out of our discussion. Chair Hammeister suggested this committee take a look at that. We didn't get real far on that. I think there's kind of a lack of alignment around that issue, so it's going to be something we just talk about. I think some folks see this as maybe some sort of a threat. I'm not quite sure why, just to evolve this process, or maybe they're not going to be prepared when something is proposed. It's a little confusing to me because we already did just go through, what was it, 3 years ago now? An amendment to the master plan without a process. So if we can do it without a process, we probably should have a process to be able to do it moving forward. So that was the detailed discussions at the Capitol and Parks Capital and Park Recreation Authority meeting. Any questions? Lisa?
No questions. I just wanted to say I'm really supportive of rebuilding the boardwalk at the marsh. This is a great asset for us. Maybe I do have a question. I'm not sure what my question is. I'm trying to see how that facility is not a regional park.
Right.
Regional.
But it's a regional facility.
But it is a regional facility, but there is parks programming there.
Yes.
But, okay, but funding just falls under the regular COG formula for parks. For that.
Right, which is the amended minus half moon formula.
Right, okay.
Unless we were to take out a loan, which then I think we negotiate in that moment, which is similar to the formula, but yeah.
So the other two facilities I would like in that one too would be the library and the active adult center, because they're not regional parks officially, and those two get a lot of external funding from different things. So I think your proposal of asking Penn State to be a contributing partner kind of would go along with
Interesting.
that. I don't know if that's actually how Center Parks and Rec views that or not, but I would think that would add to the argument of asking them to contribute.
Interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yes, it does model similarly there.
I know we're getting into the history right now,
Oh, brother.
History, so I'll take
There's a lot of history there.
I'm sure.
take the advantage of being new, and so not having to delve that deep into
Yeah.
it, and just sharing that kind of
Thank
perspective.
you, thanks. Okay, next up is so this is the Climate Action Technical Advisory Group, which should be under the other committee report. So I'll just bump it down there. So we'll just go to Climate Action Sustainability Committee, which is Prasenjit. Thank you.
So the bulk of the meetings that has happened in this committee, as you will see from the agenda, is to basically get sort of the charter in order. And so typically we have one or two updates by Pam Adams and an outline for what will be coming. So you can read some of the reports on the COG website, and Center Sustains is the name of the website. But I think one thing that was passed unanimously was, and it's in the heart of the agenda, which is reduction targets for the COG. And so you can see by 2030, we want a 45% reduction and so on. The other thing that was discussed was there is a schedule of tasks for the completion to essentially get the plan done, present it to the general forum, and then present it to the municipalities for input, and so on and so forth. But we were told, and I think some of us said that it might be a good idea to start discussing already within our municipalities about some of these goals and what we think about that. I think personally, Ferguson Township already has a pretty decent plan and is doing things in line or maybe even more stringent than what has been laid out. But I would appreciate any feedback from people who have a better understanding, either staff or some of our members who have been here for some time and know things a little bit more than me. But the general dates are provided in the agenda. I think the idea is to come formally. They will come to us on or around September 27th, and September 13th is when it should be coming out to the general forum, unless anything is pushed back. The other thing is that there is a UAJA solar installation tour on the 28th of July, and I'm excited to go and see what's going on. I think if anyone else wants to come along, we can get them in too. That's what at least I was told. So if you are interested, please let me know, or maybe directly let Corey Miller or Jason Wirt know, or somebody at the COG know, and join in. So that's, I think, all that I can remember as being worthy of pointing out beyond what is already there in the agenda.
Thank you, Prasenjit. I'm going to open it up to any questions, Prasenjit, and I have a comment. No questions? Okay, no questions? All right, so my comment is, and this may not be actually the best context to bring it up in, because this might not be an appropriate example, but it did remind me that after the Whitehall Road Regional Park loan additional funding question came to us somewhat unexpectedly, it wasn't, the COG, no committee in COG ever officially referred it to Ferguson Township to have a discussion. It was always just sort of like, oh yeah, maybe you want to talk about it. It might be important to talk about these multi-millions of dollars that you're spending based on our request. And I think that we can get into a situation where First, we don't have clear direction from COG as to whether we need to discuss this or not. And second, it can be really a dilemma in terms of scheduling dialogues. When some municipalities do it, some don't, then you have to go back and blah, 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 so on and so forth. So I'm gonna work on communicating better to COG when we have conversations there about maybe it's a good idea for the municipalities to begin discussing this. Well, is it or isn't a good idea? And are you sending that to the municipalities for discussion so we can officially get that on an agenda? And it doesn't really fall to the elected officials to kind of like toss the dice and figure out if we need to or not. So I had heard you say, it might be they had mentioned it might be a good idea to begin discussing this. We'd certainly be willing to put something up for discussion. In this particular case, I concur with you that Ferguson is ahead of a lot of the rest of the region on it, so maybe it's less critical for us, but the question still remains of, are we supposed to discuss it officially or not? Thank you.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking, given that comment, what I'm going to do is I'll send out an email to Pam Adams, Betsy Whitman, who's the chair of CAS, and maybe whoever is the right person in COG on the staff side, and ask them where I can get concrete things that the township needs to know, and any concrete ask with respect to funding, with respect to ordinance, and so on, and find that, or find when the timeline for when those will be developed, and make sure that it comes to us as soon as it's there. So I'll follow that up.
Thank you so much, Prasenjit. I really appreciate that with time management for the township. Okay, let's move on to other committee reports with the Climate Action Technical Advisory Group. I believe that's Eric Anderson, or I'm not even sure.
We
Who is
really
that?
don't have any representation on the tag. It's
Okay.
more of it's just kind of informational agenda item.
Okay, and was there anything in particular that we should, how do we know what should, is it just through our review of the agenda then that we would identify important things to possibly discuss?
Right, I
Okay.
made a note to move it to other committee reports, so I'll pass that along
Okay.
to Faith, who prepares
Yeah.
these. And there's nothing on there that I
Okay,
see that's.
okay. All right, thank you. And then we'll move smoothly into staff reports, and you're up, Dave, with your manager's report.
Yeah, the reports are all in there as written. Nothing really major to highlight in the manager's report. Planning, our Public Works Director's report, the one item that's not included in there is a grant award that we were successful in receiving, $108,000 from Green Light Go. And this will go for digital radar detection upgrades at some of our signals that don't have that technology yet. There's some notes in there about the traffic study and requested crosswalk at the intersection of Cherry Lane and Martin Street, so we're in the process of completing those. And there's something that I was waiting to hear about that was talked about in the intermission by two board members. I don't know if you want to do this now, you want to inject it now?
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for the Cherry Lane crosswalk item. and
Yeah, so the
I
Cherry
didn't
Lane
see
crosswalk
that.
item, there is existing pedestrian accommodations on either side of the street. So the crosswalk is a pretty easy lift. We'll be able to do that with our line striping contract. The assessment for the stop intersection, that's what we have to study and analyze. So that's what's on the township engineer's scope, or work plan rather. He hasn't had a chance to begin that study yet. But we're gonna have the crosswalk striped with our line striping contract. So that'll come about pretty soon. That should take care of a significant safety concern that's been, kind of outlined before. So there was another crosswalk intersection in Nixon and Pine Grove Road. I talked to the township engineer to get an update on that, and that's waiting for the recommencement of the study being done by McCormick Taylor. So McCormick Taylor is working on a revised scope right now. That should be done really this week, and then will be, because a revised proposal, I should say, because when we put them on hold with their proposal, it was about a year ago, so they're gonna have to refine that and make any modifications to it. So the recommendation is that we wait until that assessment is done before we consider striping or painting any crosswalks there.
Okay, so the Nixon Road will be incorporated into that,
Correct.
which is likely to start
In the
after,
fall.
in the fall, yes,
That's right.
okay. Okay, thanks for that. And then you think that the striping at Radio Park can get done before the school year begins? the
Yes,
anticipated, okay.
yes, so, and I don't know exactly when we have it with our line striping contract awards, that when that gets done, this will get wrapped up right in that.
Okay, so with that, so the, things I was gonna bring up were that, Supervisor Stevens and I did take a walk with the, parent who came and spoke to us and walked around with his son, and he showed us the, areas of, concern around there, so, a couple of things we wanted to bring back to you to get some guidance on how to move forward, and maybe this is enough, were there's some overgrowth from trees on Martin Street as you are moving toward the school on the right-hand side that is covering up the school crossing ahead sign to make it not so visible. And then on the other side, on Cherry Lane, again, between Martin Street and Atherton Street, there's overgrowth from trees coming down over the sidewalk. And maybe also some vegetation encroaching there too. So we didn't measure anything, and I'm not sure what the standards are. So, but it did seem did seem to block a bit of the passageway. So, so is conveying that to you enough,
That's
to,
fine.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
we do have standards that require clearance on sidewalks, so we can make sure that, they are, yeah, I guess we did, we just talked
Yeah,
about this.
right.
So we'll take a look at that, and then we can serve notice to any property owners. First, we give them an opportunity to trim them back, and then, we're able to take action if they don't.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I made those two notes. I may follow up with an email just to make sure I got the locations right. But I have Martin Street that obstructs the crossing ahead sign, and then Cherry Atherton area, so just general overgrowth.
Yep, and I can describe, there were a
Okay.
couple of spots on Cherry Lane, so I can.
And I
Yeah, if
just,
you wanna send an email with those,
Oh,
this
yeah.
way I don't miss anything, but I can also follow up too.
and the signage, so that was another thing that was a little odd. So they'll be studying the signage only because one half of Cherry Lane is State College Borough signage that said like end school zone, but we couldn't find the beginning school zone, and we thought maybe that one was like,
Right.
where does it begin? And,
Yeah,
but then it was like, well, we'd have to look at our driver's manual because we didn't know what a sign meant, so.
Right, the signage seemed a little inconsistent, and we weren't sure if it was the purview of the school district, the township, or the borough, because of everything
Yeah, the way
involved
that-
with
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe all those signs are on the municipality, not the school district, but whether it's the borough or Ferguson, that we'll have to look into. I noted that too.
Okay, thank you, and I'll follow up in an email.
Thanks for pursuing that, you guys, for going out for that walk. That's great. Okay, I have a few rapid-fire items to combine communications to the board and to the managers / all other reports questions, but did you have something
I
else?
did
Lisa?
have one,
Yeah.
just one other, I guess this is planning and zoning related, on Route 26 below Sheets, when you're headed towards Shingletown Road, the signs for a zoning hearing, and maybe there was a development review. I just noticed a bunch of new township signs on the right-hand side of the road as you're approaching the Sheets, so were those related to UAJA or something else?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So one thing I will point out, that's not in the reports, is I'll be attending next Tuesday's zoning hearing board meeting to support the request for variance at the Scott Road Pump Station. Both of those are tied to that development,
Okay.
that rebuild.
Thanks.
The variance is for floodplain encroachment, and then development plan is for the rebuild.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a couple of things, and Dave, I will follow up with an email. I just kind of wanted to get them out for the board to hear, and then everybody will more understand my follow-up email. So when I was at the Park Authority meeting, I think I noticed that there was a grow zone in Homestead Park. Okay. That's our park, or is that?
That's our park,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm.
I didn't see any grow zone signs, and I don't remember it going through the policy.
It did not go through the adoptive process. This kind of predated it.
Okay,
It's an area, if I remember correctly, it's
hill.
along a ridged area.
well, it's a
that,
hill.
and then there's also, yeah, it's a hill.
Okay.
A hill. And then there's also an area that gets a lot of washout
Okay.
that doesn't get mowed.
So that helps me understand. I don't frequent that park. I didn't know when it had appeared, but I didn't think it had gone through the policy. So do we want to put a few signs out there? I didn't go walk the whole perimeter, but I know at Fairbrook we have quite a lot of signs, but I didn't see any at all there. Do we want to pop a sign in there, or if that's intended to be a recurring thing, just to continue that education and outreach component? And then when I was there, I was noticing the great condition the pavilion was in and the not so great condition that the kiosk was in. And I know we're leading into the SIP, and I was thinking about that really nice spreadsheet that Centrise had made for our playground equipment and the year of install. And I'm just kind of saying this, I probably won't follow this up in an email, but these are the kinds of things that I think that our POS plan can address. But in the interim, we have the capital improvement program coming up. So can we bring that spreadsheet document to the SIP meetings so we can at least look at the playground data, and then just from our own talking and knowledge and frequenting our own parks, we can maybe brainstorm some things that we've noticed are in bad condition or things we might want to include in the future. And then just hearing that there's an issue with the water fountains at Fairbrook Park, and see if I represent this correctly, Dave, is that the township was going to do a repair on a water fountain. Is it a repair or a replacement?
Replacement.
Okay, the township was going to do a replacement of the water fountain, and so we submitted a water shutoff request, and Rock Spring did shut it off, but then subsequently, without notification, billed us $200 for that. So right now, we don't have, I'm assuming it's continuing, we currently don't have water to the fountains in Fairbrook Park.
Correct.
Okay, and then just a little addendum to this is that one of the proposals in the park comp plan for moving forward is that Center Region Park and Rec will do all of the water fountain replacement and repair, and they're currently doing repair in other municipalities, but we just are getting through all of our parks replacement. So we'll probably now, if that part of the proposal were to move forward, we would then be paying a portion of other municipalities' replacement where we paid all of our own. So it's just something to think about when we're talking about that MOU. Maybe we want to keep that in the purview of the municipality for multiple reasons. And then interestingly, typically Center Region Park and Rec pays the water bills and all the utility bills, but we are responsible for the bill for the shut off. So it's like very, very confusing. Just pointing that out once again, how detailed, confusing that relationship can be. I think perhaps last item, park related, is the authority was not compliant with Sunshine with at least one of their meetings, and that's been confirmed. And so in our executive committee agenda, we have an attachment or a matter of record that is the solicitor's opinion as to whether the authority falls under Sunshine purview and what that means and that kind of stuff. And So the authority has not publicly addressed that, and I'm hoping that they do, because it's A-OK to admit your mistakes, and you can, move on from that and do something different in the future. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, and that might have been one of the reasons why it was so difficult to participate in those meetings, at least that one meeting, if not more, because they actually weren't considered to be public. And then just, I think 3 more things. Sorry, I told you it was a laundry list. There have been multiple chickens, rebel chickens that are in neighbors' yards, and nobody knows what to do with them, and, they're posting on Nextdoor. I myself had chickens at my bird feeder a couple weeks ago. There's chickens on Tadpole Road that are going to get hit, and there's very few chicken permits. So it's unfortunate. I don't know what to do about it, but if folks would get the chicken permits, it would be probably a lot easier to get the chickens back to the rightful chicken owner, because you would know who had that permit within a certain radius of your house, and could maybe get them back. So if we can maybe revamp our chicken permit procedure, social media campaign, like letting folks know when permits are required and how they're free and easy and you should get them, and why it's a benefit because your chickens can return home to you. Last 2 things, there had been, I think it's been resolved, but again, I want to kind of get it out there. It's a continuing issue. The Ferguson side of the old house property was again being used for some sort of lay down yard type of thing. Again, I think it's been rapidly addressed, and isn't happening now, but it's an ongoing thing. That was, a resident had told me about that. And then lastly, something I had talked about before was what's on the giant Northland land development plan in terms of pedestrian access to that facility, and how back in that day, we allowed like the pedestrian walkway within the parking lot, and it's not maybe ideal, but that's what we decided. Well, they did pave that, and it looks great, and kudos to them for doing the paving, but now there's no markings at all any longer there where pedestrians are supposed to be crossing. So they're on the land development plan. I've been thinking maybe the pavement markings will happen later, like sometimes happens, but could we maybe just give them a nudge or a reminder, so they can get that process going before all the kids come back and are walking through there. That concludes my laundry list of items. It was busy. Thank you. All right, anything else and I, again, will follow up with an email of just a bunch of bullets like that, Dave. Anything else for staff reports? Okay, then anything else for communications to the board? All right, so we got some calendar items coming up. We'll see each other here tomorrow night and the night after for our capital improvement plan special meetings, or virtually. Other meetings are listed here. And we've got Summer Bike Anywhere Friday, July 23rd. With that, if there's nothing else,
Motion to adjourn.
so moved. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We're going to booze
Bye.
up.
Everybody, I'm still here.
Night. So can we, do we need a chaperone if more than 2 of us go out for drinks?
Actually, they close at 10 o'clock.
Oh, man, what?
Do we need a show?
Yes, the answer is yes. So we have to finish like way before 10.
Yeah.
We have to go booze
All right,
up.
so now I just have to, I have
All right.
to call for a ride home.
Well, I can do right.
Oh, no, that's okay, you go that way.
Well, no, but my mind is so on right now. I'm like, I'm just gonna go home and tend to my cat, so.
Okay, then,
Yeah,
thank
let's-
you. Okay.
Yeah. I need a lot of drinks before I hear that. Oh, wait, I wanna get in on this, what?
The history of Millbrook